Long before the Erdtree cast its golden light across the lands between, before Queen Marika ascended to godhood, before the very concept of grace was bestowed upon the chosen, there existed a lineage that stretched back to the primordial age of dragons, and from that ancient bloodline emerged Messmer, a figure whose origins predate the divine order itself, making him one of the oldest and most enigmatic beings in all of Elden Ring's sprawling mythology. His existence is not merely a footnote in the annals of the lands between, but a thread that weaves through every age, every upheaval, every transformation of power, connecting the primal chaos of Dragonfire to the calculated tyranny of the Golden Order, and within his very flesh writhes a serpent, a creature of such profound significance that it binds him to forces far older and more terrible than the gods themselves. This is not simply the story of a warrior or a demigod, but the chronicle of a being caught between worlds, between eras, between the savage truth of what came before and the gilded lies of what followed, a figure who embodies the suppressed history that the Erdtree's faithful would prefer, remained buried beneath centuries of propaganda and divine mandate. Messmer's tale is one of forbidden knowledge, of bloodlines that should never have mixed, of powers that were meant to remain sealed away in the forgotten corners of existence, and of a serpent that whispers secrets from an age when dragons ruled the skies and the very earth trembled beneath their claws. To understand the full scope of his tragedy, to comprehend why his name is spoken in hushed tones by those few who still remember, to grasp the true nature of the serpent that coils within him like a curse and a blessing intertwined, you must first understand that the history of the lands between is not a single narrative, but a palimpsest, layer upon layer of conquest and erasure, where each new order seeks to obliterate the memory of what came before, and Messmer stands as living proof of everything the Golden Order tried to forget. His story challenges the very foundation of Marika's reign, questions the legitimacy of the Erdtree's dominance, and reveals that the age of gods and grace was built upon the bones of something far more ancient, something that still pulses with primordial power in the veins of those who carry the old blood. The serpent within him is not merely a parasite or a symbol, it is a connection to the time before time, to the dragons who shaped the world with their immortal stone scales and their mastery over the fundamental forces of reality, and through Messmer, that ancient power persists, hidden but never truly extinguished, waiting for the moment when the carefully constructed lies of the present age would finally crumble and the truth would emerge like a serpent shedding its skin. This is a story that spans millennia, from the volcanic peaks where dragons made their roosts to the glimmering halls of Lanedell, from the primordial crucible where all life was once unified in chaotic potential to the rigid hierarchies imposed by the Two Fingers and their divine mandate. And at every crucial juncture, Messmer's shadow falls across the path of history, sometimes as a warrior, sometimes as a heretic, sometimes as a monster, but always as a reminder that the past cannot be so easily buried. The serpent that dwells within him carries memories of the age of dragons, when Placidusax ruled as Elden Lord before the Erdtree even existed, when the world was shaped by ancient stone and lightning rather than golden grace, when power was earned through strength and dominion rather than bestowed by distant gods. And those memories make Messmer dangerous, not because of his martial prowess or his command over flame, but because he knows what the Golden Order has tried so desperately to conceal. His very existence is an act of defiance against the narrative that Marika and her followers have constructed, a narrative that positions the Erdtree as eternal and inevitable, that casts the Age of Grace as the natural culmination of history rather than just another chapter in an endless cycle of rise and fall, and Messmer's lineage, stretching back to the dragons themselves, proves that the Golden Order is neither the beginning nor the end, merely a temporary ascendancy that will one day crumble like all the orders that came before. The serpent within him is both his greatest curse and his most potent gift, a source of power that sets him apart from other demigods, that marks him as something other, something that does not fit neatly into the categories that the Golden Order has established. And this otherness makes him a threat, not to any particular individual or faction, but to the entire conceptual framework upon which Marika's reign is built. To be connected to the dragons is to be connected to a time before the greater will imposed its order upon the lands between, before the Elden Ring became the source of all law and structure, before grace became the measure of worth and destiny, and that connection cannot be tolerated by those who have staked everything on the supremacy and permanence of the current age. Messmer's story is therefore not just his own, but the story of how history is written and rewritten, how the victors determine what is remembered and what is forgotten, how entire ages can be reduced to whispers and fragments, while the present is elevated to the status of eternal truth, and how those who carry the memory of what was lost become enemies of the state simply by existing. The serpent within him is a living archive, a biological record of the primordial era, and every beat of its heart is a rebellion against the amnesia that the Golden Order seeks to impose. Every flicker of its tongue is a reminder that there were powers in the world before the Erdtree, and there will be powers after it falls. His lineage is a map that traces backward through time, through the rise of Marika and the establishment of the Golden Order, through the wars that preceded her ascension, through the age when dragons still held dominion, all the way back to the Crucible itself, that churning cauldron of primordial life where all forms were possible and nothing was yet fixed. And in following that map, you discover that the neat categories of the present, the clear divisions between God and beast, between grace and curse, between order and chaos, are artificial constructs imposed upon a reality that is far more fluid and far more dangerous than the Golden Order would have you believe. Messmer embodies that fluidity, that danger, that refusal to be categorized and controlled, and the serpent within him is the physical manifestation of his resistance to the tyranny of fixed forms and predetermined destinies. His story is a journey through every age of the lands between, from the volcanic fury of the Age of Dragons, through the golden radiance of the Erdtree long before the Erdtree pierced the sky, before the Golden Order imposed its law upon the world. The lands between belonged to an altogether different power. In the primordial era, when the world was young and wild, the ancient dragons reigned supreme over every mountain peak, every windswept plain, and every storm-tossed shore. These were not mere beasts, but sovereigns of the First Order, beings whose very existence was woven from stone and lightning, whose scales could turn aside any blade forged by mortal hands. The dragons established the first true civilization the world had known, a hierarchy built not on fleeting ambition, but on the eternal nature of their kind. They were immortal in ways that later ages would struggle to comprehend, their bodies as much a part of the landscape as the mountains themselves, their breath the very thunder that split the heavens. At the apex of this draconic hierarchy stood figures of such terrible majesty that their names would echo through millennia. Chief among them was the Storm Lord, a dragon whose wings could blot out the sun and whose roar commanded the very weather itself. The Storm Lord did not merely rule, He embodied the principle of order that the dragons sought to impose upon the chaotic, formless world they had inherited. Under his guidance, the dragons erected monuments of stone that still stand in ruins today, great temples where lesser beings came to offer worship and tribute. These early worshippers, the proto humans and other creatures that scurried beneath the dragon's gaze, learned to revere the scaled sovereigns as living gods. They built shrines at the sites where dragons roosted, collected the shed scales as holy relics, and developed the first crude forms of dragon communion, attempting to touch even a fraction of the power that made the dragons eternal. The dragon civilization was not merely one of brute strength. The ancient dragons possessed knowledge that would be lost and rediscovered countless times in the ages to come. They understood the fundamental nature of stone and lightning, the two elements that composed their immortal flesh. They knew secrets of the storm that allowed them to call down lightning with precision, to read the future in the patterns of clouds, to navigate by the electromagnetic currents that flowed through the earth itself. Their architecture reflected this understanding, great structures aligned with ley lines and storm paths, designed to channel and amplify the natural forces they commanded. The dragons kept their own histories, though not in books or scrolls, as later civilizations would. Instead, they preserved memory in the very stone of their bodies, each scale a record, each claw a chronicle of battles fought and won. But even in this age of draconic supremacy, something stirred in the depths. Far beneath the surface world that the dragons claimed as their domain, in lightless caverns and magma-heated chambers that had never known the touch of sky, an entity of altogether different nature began to wake. The serpent was primordial in ways that even the ancient dragons could not claim. Where the dragons represented order, hierarchy, and the eternal unchanging nature of stone, the serpent embodied chaos, transformation, and the endless cycle of death and rebirth. It was not a creature in the conventional sense, but rather a force made flesh, a manifestation of the earth's own churning molten heart. The earliest records, fragmentary and contradictory as they are, suggest that the serpent had always existed in some form, coiled in the deepest places, waiting for the world above to ripen and become ready for its influence. When the serpent finally emerged into the awareness of surface-dwelling beings, it came not with the thunder and spectacle of the dragons, but with a subtle, insidious presence that seeped into the world like poison into water. Those who encountered the serpent, or its influence, described a being of impossible length, its coils extending through caverns and tunnels that seemed to have no end, its scales not the metallic sheen of dragonkind, but something darker, something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The serpent's eyes, according to these early accounts, held a knowledge that predated even the dragon's reign, a wisdom born of countless cycles of shedding and renewal. To look into those eyes was to understand, however briefly, that all things must change, that all order must eventually give way to chaos, and that death was merely another form of transformation. The serpent's influence spread through the land in ways both physical and metaphysical. Where its coils passed through the earth, strange new forms of life emerged. Plants grew twisted and strange, their roots reaching deeper than any natural vegetation, their fruits carrying properties that could heal or poison with equal ease. Animals that drank from springs, touched by the serpent's presence, underwent transformations, their bodies adapting and changing in ways that should have taken generations, but instead occurred within a single lifetime. The land itself seemed to respond to the serpent's power, becoming more feral, more untamed, resisting the order that the dragons sought to impose. Valleys that had been tamed and settled would suddenly erupt with new growth, choking out the careful cultivation that dragon worshipping peoples had established. Mountains would shift and crack, revealing new passages to the underworld where the serpent's presence was strongest. It was in this time of growing serpentine influence that Messmer's ancestors first rose to prominence. They were not a single family, but rather a lineage of individuals bound together by their willingness to embrace what others feared. These early sorcerers and warriors came from various peoples and places, but they shared a common recognition that the serpent represented not a threat, but an opportunity. Where the dragons offered the stability of stone and the power of lightning to those who served them faithfully, the serpent offered something far more intoxicating: the promise of transformation, the possibility of transcending one's mortal limitations through embrace of the chaotic forces that the serpent embodied. These ancestors were outcasts and visionaries, individuals who had seen the rigid hierarchy of dragon rule and found it wanting, who believed that true power came not from preservation, but from constant change and renewal. The lineage that would eventually produce Messmer began to gather followers, establishing what historians would later describe as a cult, though to its members it was nothing less than a true religion. They worshiped the serpent as a divine force, the great transformer, the breaker of chains, the entity that would eventually bring down even the eternal dragons and remake the world in a new image. Their worship took forms that would have been unrecognizable to the dragon cults that dominated the surface world. Where dragon worshippers built temples of stone that reached toward the sky, the serpent's followers dug downward, creating sanctuaries in caves and tunnels, places where the boundary between the surface world and the serpent's domain grew thin. They did not offer prayers of supplication, but rather rituals of transformation, ceremonies designed to bring them closer to the serpent's nature, to allow them to shed their old selves as a serpent sheds its skin. The cult's practices drew heavily on the power that flowed from the serpent itself. The ancestors of Messmer discovered that by performing certain rites in places where the serpent's influence was strong, they could tap into energies that rivaled even the dragon's lightning. This power manifested in various forms. Some cultists developed the ability to command flame, not the simple fire that any primitive human could coax from wood and tinder, but a deeper, more primal flame that seemed to burn with the heat of the earth's core itself. Others gained the power to transform their own flesh, taking on serpentine characteristics, their eyes becoming slitted, their tongues forked, their bodies capable of contortions that no normal human frame could achieve. Still others developed a form of sorcery that worked not through the careful study and discipline that would characterize later magical traditions, but through direct communion with the chaotic forces the serpent represented, casting spells that twisted and warped reality itself. As the serpent's cult grew in power and influence, it inevitably came into conflict with the established dragon cults that had dominated the lands between since time immemorial. The dragons and their followers viewed the serpent and its worshippers with a mixture of contempt and fear. To the dragons, the serpent represented everything they opposed: chaos against order, change against stability, the soft, yielding earth against the eternal hardness of stone. The dragon cults preached that the serpent was an abomination, a force of corruption that threatened to undo all the civilization that the dragons had built. They told stories of lands consumed by the serpent's influence, where all structure and hierarchy had broken down, where beings lived in a state of constant painful transformation, never able to rest in a single form. These stories were not entirely propaganda, there was truth to them, for the serpent's power was indeed dangerous to those unprepared for its touch. The Storm Lord himself took particular notice of the growing serpent cult. From his perch atop the highest peaks, he could see the changes spreading through the land. The way the careful order he and his kind had imposed was beginning to fray at the edges. The Storm Lord understood that the serpent represented an existential threat, not just to dragon rule, but to the very concept of permanence that the dragons embodied. He began to organize systematic efforts to suppress the serpent's influence, leading flights of dragons to scour the land for serpent cult sanctuaries, ordering his followers to seal the deep caves and tunnels where the serpent's presence was strongest, and demanding that any who had trafficked with the serpent's power be brought before him for judgment. The serpent's followers did not wait idly for the dragon's power to crumble on its own. Instead, they moved with calculated precision, embedding themselves within the very institutions that upheld draconic rule. Members of the cult took positions as advisors to lesser dragon lords, as scribes who maintained the records of Farum Azula's vast archives, and as emissaries who traveled between the scattered dragon territories. In these roles, they whispered doubts into receptive ears, questioned the wisdom of ancient traditions, and subtly redirected resources away from the collective defense of dragon society. The cult's strategy was not one of open rebellion, but of patient erosion, understanding that the dragon's greatest weakness was their assumption of permanence. These immortal beings, who had witnessed the turning of ages, could not conceive that their reign might end, and this blindness made them vulnerable to threats that grew slowly from within. The infiltration bore fruit in ways both subtle and profound. Dragon lords, who had once cooperated in maintaining the great wards that protected their territories, began to hoard their power, convinced by cultist whispers that their neighbors plotted against them. Ancient alliances, forged in the fires of the primordial wars, frayed as suspicion replaced trust. The great councils that had once convened in Farum Azula's highest chambers grew contentious, with debates devolving into accusations and in some cases outright violence. The cult's agents carefully documented each fracture, each moment of weakness, sending reports back to their hidden sanctuaries where Messmer's ancestors studied the patterns of Dragon Society's decay. These reports, inscribed on tablets of obsidian and hidden in sealed chambers beneath the earth, would later form the foundation of the Serpent's strategic doctrine, a body of knowledge that taught future generations how to topple even the mightiest empires from within. Then came the catastrophe that would forever alter the balance of power in the lands between. The exact nature of this event remains shrouded in conflicting accounts and mythological embellishment, but its effects were undeniable. Some ancient texts speak of a meteor, a fragment of a dying star that plummeted from the heavens with such force that it shattered mountains and boiled seas. The impact, according to these accounts, struck near the heart of dragon territory, creating a crater so vast that it would later become a sacred site for the serpent's cult. Other sources suggest something more deliberate, a divine intervention by forces that predated even the dragons themselves, entities from the spaces between worlds who saw the dragon's reign as an impediment to their own designs. A third interpretation, favored by scholars who study the serpent's cryptic texts, proposes that the catastrophe was the serpent's own doing, a manifestation of its power that had been building beneath the earth for untold centuries, finally erupting in a cataclysm that reshaped the very geology of the lands between. Regardless of its origin, the catastrophe's consequences were immediate and devastating. Dragon strongholds that had stood for millennia crumbled as the earth itself convulsed. The great wards that protected dragon territories flickered and failed, their power sources disrupted by the violent reshaping of the land's fundamental structure. Entire dragon bloodlines were extinguished in moments as their carefully constructed lairs collapsed or were consumed by the fires that swept across the landscape. Farum Azula itself, though it endured, was torn partially free from its moorings in the physical world, beginning its slow drift into the liminal space between realms where it would eventually reside. The dragons, for all their power and majesty, found themselves suddenly vulnerable, their attention divided between repairing the damage to their civilization and defending against the threats that inevitably arise when strength falters. Messmer's ancestors recognized this moment for what it was, the opportunity that generations of their lineage had been preparing for. They emerged from the shadows where they had hidden, gathering the scattered members of the Serpent's cult and consolidating their forces. These forebears were not warriors in the traditional sense. They did not challenge the dragons to open combat, for that would have been suicide even in the dragon's weakened state. Instead, they positioned themselves as mediators, as those who could speak to both the dragons above and the Serpent's power below. They approached dragon lords whose territories had been devastated, offering aid in the form of knowledge about the land's new configuration, about the flows of power that had been redirected by the catastrophe. They presented themselves as scholars of the Earth's mysteries, as those who could help the dragons adapt to the changed world. Many dragons, desperate to restore their crumbling domains, accepted this aid. They did not realize, or perhaps chose not to see, that in doing so they were granting Messmer's ancestors a foothold in the structures of power. The cult's members became indispensable, their knowledge of the Serpent's influence over the land, allowing them to predict where new sources of power would emerge, where the earth would stabilize, and where it would continue to shift. They guided the reconstruction of dragon territories, but always in ways that subtly favored the Serpent's long-term goals. Strongholds were rebuilt over sites where the Serpent's power ran deep, ensuring that dragon lords would gradually become exposed to its corrupting influence. Trade routes were redirected to pass through regions where the cult maintained hidden sanctuaries, allowing for the movement of agents and resources. Slowly, methodically, Messmer's ancestors wove themselves into the fabric of post-catastrophe society, becoming intermediaries whose influence extended far beyond what their numbers might suggest. The Serpent itself rewarded this progress by granting visions to its most devoted followers. These were not mere dreams, but vivid, overwhelming experiences that showed the faithful a world transformed. In these visions, the lands between were reborn in chaos, the rigid hierarchies of dragon rule dissolved into a more primal state where power flowed to those strong enough to seize it. The visions showed great cities rising where dragon strongholds had stood, built not of stone and scale, but of flame and shadow, structures that breathed and shifted like living things. They showed Messmer's lineage at the center of this new world, not as servants or subjects, but as sovereigns, their serpentine eyes seeing truths that others could not perceive, their mastery of flame allowing them to reshape reality itself. The visions promised dominion, not through the static, eternal rule that the dragons had maintained, but through constant transformation, an ever-changing hierarchy where only the adaptable would thrive. These visions served a crucial purpose beyond mere motivation. They provided a unified goal for the cult's disparate factions, a shared understanding of what they were working toward. The knowledge contained within the visions was recorded in the cryptic texts that the cult had begun to compile, elaborate manuscripts that combined prophecy with practical instruction. These texts taught the rituals necessary to channel the serpent's power, the meditations required to resist the dragon's mental dominance, and the strategies needed to survive in a world where their beliefs marked them as heretics. The texts were written in a cipher that drew on the serpent's own symbolic language, a script that seemed to shift and change depending on who read it, revealing different layers of meaning to initiates of different ranks. The most sacred of these manuscripts were inscribed on the shed skin of great serpents, preserved through alchemical processes that the cult's masters had perfected over generations. The dragons, of course, did not remain ignorant of these developments forever. The Storm Lord, mightiest of the dragon sovereigns and master of the tempests that scoured the highest peaks, was the first to recognize the true scope of the threat. Where other dragons saw the cult as a minor nuisance, a collection of primitive humans playing with forces they did not understand, the Storm Lord perceived the pattern. He saw how the cult's influence had spread, how their agents had insinuated themselves into positions of trust, how the catastrophe had not been a random disaster, but an orchestrated strike against dragon hegemony. The Storm Lord gathered those dragon lords who remained loyal to the old ways, those who had resisted the cult's blandishments and maintained the purity of their ancient traditions. Together, they launched what would become known as the Purge of Scales, a crusade intended to eradicate the serpent's followers once and for all. The devastation that followed was unlike anything the lands between had witnessed since the primordial wars. The Stormlord and his allies descended upon every known cult sanctuary, every suspected gathering place, with the full fury of draconic power. They burned entire regions, their lightning and flame turning forests to ash and mountains to glass. They hunted cult members without mercy, using their ancient magics to track even those who had hidden themselves through sorcery. The dragon's assault was systematic and thorough, proceeding from the outer territories inward, driving the cult's survivors toward the center of the lands between, where they could be more easily contained and destroyed. Thousands perished in the initial waves of the purge, entire generations of cultists who had dedicated their lives to the serpent's cause, wiped out in moments of draconic wrath. Yet Messmer's forebears survived. They had learned caution through generations of hiding, had developed strategies for disappearing that went beyond simple concealment. When the Stormlord's forces approached, the most important members of the lineage retreated into sanctuaries that had been prepared for precisely this eventuality. Deep underground chambers where the serpent's power was strongest and where dragon magic could not easily penetrate. The Stormlord's reign, which had held the draconic hierarchy together through sheer dominance and elemental fury, came to an abrupt and mysterious end. Whether the Stormlord was slain in battle by rivals seeking to claim supremacy, or whether this ancient dragon simply departed from the known world, abandoning its subjects to their fate, remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the primordial era. What is certain is that the vacuum left by this departure threw the dragon clans into immediate and catastrophic disarray. Without the unifying force of their supreme overlord, the various draconic factions turned upon one another with the same ferocity they had once directed at their enemies. Ancient grudges, long suppressed under the Stormlord's authority, erupted into open warfare. Dragons who had commanded respect through their association with the Stormlord found their legitimacy questioned. Lesser drakes, who had chafed under the old order, saw opportunity in the chaos. The skies became battlegrounds as rival worms contested territory, resources, and the very right to claim leadership over dragonkind. This internal strife weakened the dragons far more effectively than any external threat ever could, transforming them from an unstoppable unified force into scattered, feuding warbands. It was precisely this moment of draconic vulnerability that the Serpent's followers had been waiting for through generations of enforced secrecy. The faithful who had maintained their devotion in hidden sanctuaries, in sealed chambers beneath the earth, in remote valleys where dragon patrols rarely ventured, now emerged into a world transformed. The ancestors of Messmer's bloodline, who had preserved the Serpent's teachings through the darkest years of draconic persecution, found themselves suddenly free to practice their faith openly once more. They reclaimed ancient temples that had been abandoned or desecrated during the Age of Dragons. They rebuilt shrines at sites of power where the Serpent's influence ran strong through the very bedrock. These early faithful were not merely religious devotees, but also warriors, scholars, and strategists who understood that the collapse of one order created opportunities for those prepared to seize them. They moved carefully at first, testing the new landscape, gauging which dragon clans were too preoccupied with their own conflicts to pose a threat. They established networks of communication between scattered communities of believers, reuniting groups that had lost contact during the long years of hiding. They began to accumulate resources, weapons, knowledge, and most importantly, they began to position themselves as a potential new power in the shifting dynamics of the world. While the Serpent's cult rebuilt and the dragons tore themselves apart, something entirely new began to manifest across the landscape. The earliest precursors to what would eventually become the Erdtree started to appear in various locations. These were not yet the towering golden beacon that would later dominate the lands between, but rather smaller manifestations, strange growths that seemed to exist partially outside normal reality. Witnesses described trees with bark that shimmered with inner light, roots that spread with unnatural speed, and a presence that felt fundamentally different from anything that had come before. Some scholars who studied these phenomena noted that they appeared at sites of concentrated life energy, places where death and rebirth cycled with particular intensity. Others observed that these proto-trees seemed to draw power from the very concept of order itself, imposing structure and hierarchy upon the chaotic natural world around them. The appearance of these precursors signaled more than just a botanical curiosity. They represented the beginning of a fundamental shift in the metaphysical architecture of the world. The age of raw elemental power, of dragons and serpents and primal forces, was giving way to something more structured, more deliberate, more golden. Those who were sensitive to such changes could feel the primordial era drawing to its close, could sense that the rules governing reality itself were being rewritten. Among the Serpent's most devoted followers, a prophecy began to circulate with renewed urgency. The ancient texts and oral traditions spoke of a serpent child, a chosen one who would be born bearing the mark of their god, who would embody both human ambition and serpentine power. This prophesied figure was described as a herald, someone whose very existence would announce the rebirth of the world according to the Serpent's design. The prophecy was not entirely clear about whether this rebirth would be literal or metaphorical, whether it meant the physical transformation of the landscape or a spiritual revolution in how power was understood and wielded. What was clear was that the Serpent Child would possess abilities beyond normal human limits, would command the loyalty of those who served the serpent, and would ultimately challenge whatever order had risen to dominance by the time of their arrival. The prophecy spoke of eyes that burned with inner fire, of a body that could withstand corruption that would destroy ordinary mortals, of a will strong enough to bear the weight of the serpent's full attention without breaking. Some versions of the prophecy suggested that the serpent child would be born of noble blood, connecting the ancient faith to the emerging power structures of human civilization. Others hinted at a more mystical origin, a child touched by the serpent, even in the womb, marked for greatness before drawing their first breath. The bloodline that would eventually produce Messmer took this prophecy with deadly seriousness. These ancestors were not content to merely wait passively for the prophesied one to appear. Instead, they began a deliberate program of preparation that would span generations. They honed their martial skills, developing fighting techniques that incorporated the fluid, striking movements they associated with serpents. They studied the arts of war, learning strategy, tactics, siegecraft, and the management of armies. They cultivated political acumen, understanding that the serpent child would need not just personal power, but also allies, resources, and institutional support to fulfill the prophecy. They gathered knowledge from every available source, building libraries that contained not just religious texts, but also practical information about metallurgy, agriculture, medicine, and engineering. They established training grounds where each generation would be tested and taught, ensuring that the skills and knowledge would not be lost. They formed alliances with other groups who might prove useful, sometimes through marriage, sometimes through mutual interest, sometimes through carefully applied pressure. They accumulated wealth, understanding that prophecies required funding, that armies needed to be fed, that power in the emerging world would require more than just faith and steel. Most crucially, they maintained meticulous genealogical records, tracking bloodlines and looking for signs that might indicate which family branch would produce the promised serpent child. Meanwhile, the dragons who had once seemed invincible faced a harsh new reality. Their numbers, already reduced by the wars against the Stormlord's rivals, and then by their own internal conflicts, continued to dwindle. The great worms who had commanded armies of lesser drakes found their forces scattered or destroyed. Ancient dragons who had lived for thousands of years fell to younger, more desperate challengers, or simply withdrew from the world entirely, seeking remote peaks or deep caverns where they might wait out the changing age. Some dragons adapted, learning to coexist with the emerging human powers, offering their strength in exchange for territory or tribute. These pragmatic worms would form the foundation of later institutions, becoming guardians, advisors, or symbols of legitimacy for human rulers who sought to cloak themselves in draconic authority. Others refused to bend, clinging to the old ways even as the world transformed around them. Those proud remnants became increasingly isolated, their domains shrinking year by year as new forces encroached upon lands they had once controlled absolutely. A few dragons sought to understand the new order represented by the Erdtree's precursors, attempting to forge some accommodation with this strange golden power. Most, however, simply tried to survive, their concerns narrowing from continental dominance to merely maintaining their individual territories and perhaps raising one more generation of wormlings before the age turned completely against them. The serpent's influence, which had surged with the dragon's collapse, began to wane as the Erdtree's precursors grew stronger and more numerous. The golden power that emanated from these strange growths seemed fundamentally opposed to the serpent's nature. Where the serpent represented transformation, shedding, and the cycle of death and rebirth through consumption, the Erdtree's power spoke of permanence, of order imposed from above, of death as an aberration to be controlled rather than a natural process to be embraced. The serpent's faithful found that their rituals became less potent in areas where the proto-trees had taken root. The visions and direct communications they had sometimes received from their god grew less frequent, less clear. It became apparent that the coming age would not belong to the serpent, that whatever the prophecy promised, it would have to manifest in a world dominated by this new golden order. This realization did not break the faith of the true believers, but it did force them to adapt their expectations. The serpent child, when they came, would not be born into a world ready to receive them, but rather into one that would likely view them as a threat, an aberration, something to be controlled or destroyed. Understanding that the age was turning irrevocably, Messmer's ancestors made the decision to preserve their accumulated knowledge and traditions for future generations. They created hidden repositories where texts, artifacts, and weapons could be stored safely. They encoded their most important teachings in symbols and rituals that could be passed down even if the explicit knowledge was lost. They established oaths and pacts that would bind their descendants to the serpent's cause, regardless of how much time passed or how much the world changed. They ensured that the prophecy itself would be remembered, repeated, taught to each new generation, so that when the signs appeared, when the serpent child was finally born, there would be those ready to recognize and support them. These preparations were made with the understanding that the faithful might have to endure another long period of suppression, that the golden age dawning might prove as hostile to the serpent's followers as the age of dragons had been. The primordial era drew to its close not with a single dramatic event, but with a gradual transition that nevertheless felt inevitable to those who lived through it. The age of dragons ended not because the last dragon died, but because dragons ceased to be the dominant force shaping the world's destiny. The age of the Erdtree began not with the appearance of the great golden tree itself, but with these smaller precursors that established the metaphysical groundwork for what was to come. Yet beneath this transition, hidden but not forgotten, the serpent's presence remained. The faith endured, the bloodlines continued, the prophecy waited, and somewhere in the future that was now beginning to unfold, a child would be born who would carry within them both the legacy of this ancient god and the terrible burden of fulfilling a destiny conceived in an age that had passed into legend. We now enter the early Erdtree era, a time of profound transformation when the ancient dominion of the dragons crumbled before a new cosmic force. The Age of Dragons, which had endured for untold millennia, came to its inevitable conclusion, not through conquest or war alone, but through the emergence of something far more absolute. The Erdtree, a colossal golden tree of divine origin, rose from the heart of the lands between, and with its ascension came the end of dragon supremacy. Where once the great worms ruled the skies and commanded the storms through their mastery of ancient stone, now a single towering presence dominated the landscape, its golden boughs reaching toward the heavens as if to pierce the very fabric of reality itself. The Erdtree was not merely a tree, though its physical form certainly resembled one. It was the manifest will of the greater will, an outer god whose influence had been growing in the lands between for generations. The greater will, an entity of pure order existing beyond the material plane, sought to impose its vision of cosmic harmony upon the world. Through the Erdtree, this alien intelligence found its anchor point, its means of directly shaping the fate of all living things. The tree's roots spread deep into the earth, drawing upon the very essence of life itself, while its canopy bathed the land in radiant golden light. This was not the natural light of the sun, but something altogether different. Grace, as it came to be known, flowed from the Erdtree like water from a spring, touching those deemed worthy and marking them as chosen servants of the new order. The consolidation of power under the greater will was methodical and absolute. The Erdtree became the center of all things, the axis around which civilization would revolve. Its grace spread outward in waves, reaching the farthest corners of the lands between, and wherever that golden light touched, the old ways began to fade. The ancient dragon cults found their temples empty as worshippers turned toward the Erdtree. The primordial forces that had shaped the world for eons, the wild and untamed powers that predated even the dragons, were slowly but surely suppressed beneath the weight of the greater will's order. This was not a violent suppression, at least not initially. It was something far more insidious. The Erdtree offered prosperity, longevity, and purpose. It promised an end to the chaos that had defined the Age of Dragons, an era when might alone determined survival. Into this transforming world stepped Marika, a figure whose origins remain shrouded in mystery even to this day. What is known is that she was chosen, selected by the greater will itself, to serve as the vessel of the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring, you must understand, was the fundamental source code of reality in the lands between, a collection of great runes that governed the laws of existence itself. Life and death, cause and effect, the very structure of the world, all of these were encoded within the ring. By placing the Elden Ring within Marika, the greater will ensured that its order would be enforced not by distant cosmic influence, but by a living God who walked among mortals. Marika ascended to divinity, becoming Queen Marika the Eternal, and with her ascension came the formal establishment of the Golden Order, a religious and political system that would govern the lands between for an age. Marika's rise to power was swift and total. She established her seat of power at Leyndell, the royal capital, a city that grew in the shadow of the Erdtree itself. From there, she commanded armies, appointed lords, and began the process of bringing every corner of the lands between under the Erdtree's dominion. Her warriors, blessed with the Erdtree's grace, were nearly invincible in battle. They could see golden guidance, literal streams of light that showed them the path forward, leading them to victory after victory. The remaining dragon lords, those who had survived the initial decline of their kind, found themselves unable to resist this new force. Some, like the ancient dragon Gransax, launched desperate assaults on Leyndell itself, but even these mighty creatures were repelled. The age of dragons was truly over, and the age of the Erdtree had begun in earnest. The Erdtree's golden light became omnipresent, a constant reminder of the new order. It shone day and night, visible from every province and every settlement. Those who lived in its glow spoke of feeling complete, of understanding their place in the grand design. The light brought healing to the sick, extended the lives of the faithful, and granted visions of purpose to those who had wandered without direction. Villages that had once struggled to survive now flourished under the Erdtree's blessing. Crops grew in abundance, diseases retreated, and a golden age of prosperity seemed to dawn across the land. The Erdtree became more than a symbol. It became the foundation of existence itself, the proof that the greater will's order was not just powerful, but righteous. Yet not all forces in the lands between welcomed this transformation. In the deep places of the world, in caverns that predated even the dragons, there stirred an entity as ancient as time itself. The serpent, a primordial being of chaos and flame, had existed long before the Erdtree's arrival. Where the greater will represented order, structure, and cosmic harmony, the serpent embodied the opposite. It was chaos incarnate, a force of pure defiance against any who would claim dominion over the natural world. The serpent did not rule through grace or blessing. It offered raw power, the strength to resist, to rebel, to burn away the chains of order, and embrace the primal freedom that existed before gods walked the earth. The serpent's opposition to the Erdtree was not born of malice, but of fundamental incompatibility. The two forces represented opposing philosophies of existence. The Erdtree sought to perfect the world, to eliminate suffering through the imposition of divine law. The serpent recognized no law but survival, no order but the eternal cycle of consumption and transformation. In the early days of the Erdtree's ascendancy, this opposition remained largely philosophical, a tension felt but not yet acted upon. The serpent dwelled in its ancient sanctuaries, coiled in the darkness beneath mountains, nursing its strength and waiting. It knew that the Erdtree's light, no matter how bright, could not reach everywhere. Shadows would always remain, and in those shadows resistance would grow. Among the noble families of the lands between, one lineage found itself drawn to the serpent's power. This family, whose name has been lost to deliberate erasure from the Golden Order's histories, possessed an ancient connection to the primordial forces that predated the Erdtree. Their bloodline stretched back to the age before ages, when the world was young and the gods had not yet imposed their will upon creation. They had served as keepers of old knowledge, guardians of secrets that the new order would consider heretical. When the Erdtree rose, and Marika began her campaign to unify the lands between under the Greater Will's banner, this family faced a choice. They could bend the knee, accept the grace of the Erdtree, and prosper under the new regime, or they could remain true to the old ways, to the wild and untamed powers that had sustained their ancestors. They chose defiance. In secret ceremonies conducted far from the Erdtree's light, the family's elders made contact with the serpent. They offered their allegiance not to the greater will, but to the ancient entity that represented everything the Golden Order sought to destroy. The serpent, recognizing kindred spirits, accepted their devotion. It granted them power, but not the gentle grace of the Erdtree. The serpent's gift was fire and fury, the strength to stand against the tide of order that threatened to wash away all that came before. This pact was sealed in blood and flame, binding the family's fate to the serpent's eternal rebellion. The consequences of this allegiance were immediate and severe. The family's connection to the serpent could not be hidden forever. Marika's agents, ever vigilant for threats to the Golden Order, discovered the truth. The family was declared heretical, their lands seized, their titles stripped away. They became outcasts in the new Erdtree-dominated order, hunted by those who had once been their peers. But the family did not break. Sustained by the serpent's power, they retreated to the margins of civilization, to places where the Erdtree's light grew dim and the old ways still held sway. They became shadows, moving through the lands between unseen, preserving their forbidden knowledge and waiting for the day when the Erdtree's grip might weaken. Into this exiled lineage, in a time when the family's persecution was at its height, Messmer was born. His birth was not celebrated with the fanfare that would accompany the arrival of a noble heir in any other family. Instead, it was conducted in secrecy, hidden from the eyes of Marika's inquisitors. From his first breath, Messmer inherited a dual legacy. The blood of his ancestors flowed through his veins, carrying with it the ancient pact with the Serpent. But more than mere heritage, he bore the Serpent's mark upon his very soul. The entity that his family had sworn to serve had taken a particular interest in this child, seeing in him the potential to become something more than human, more than merely a servant of chaos. As the nascent Erdtree began its inexorable climb towards dominion, casting its golden shadow across the lands between, a curious and potent anomaly was taking root within the very heart of this burgeoning order. We are now firmly in the early Erdtree era, a period marked by the Erdtree's ascendance and the systematic consolidation of its power. It was during this foundational time that Messmer, a figure whose destiny would become inextricably linked with the fate of the realm, began to display early signs of immense power. This was no ordinary strength, but a terrifying synthesis, a blend of the Serpent's primordial chaos, a force antithetical to the Erdtree's ordered grace, and his own noble lineage, hinting at a connection to the divine, or at least to the ruling elite of the age. His very presence was a paradox, a living embodiment of the conflict that would one day tear the lands between asunder. This inherent duality was further amplified by the Serpent within, an enigmatic and powerful entity, or perhaps a spiritual inheritance that granted Messmer unique abilities. These were not the golden incantations of the Erdtree, nor the ancient dragon communion rituals, but something darker, more primal, and infinitely more unsettling. He wielded flames that were not of the Golden Order, flames that devoured and corrupted rather than purified or blessed. This distinct power set him apart, making him an outlier, an anomaly that fit neither within the Erdtree's increasingly rigid societal structure, nor among the disparate groups of outcasts who had yet to be fully subjugated or assimilated. He was a harbinger of a different kind of power, a power that whispered of forgotten ages and untamed forces. Marika, in her relentless pursuit of a unified, singular faith, had begun to establish her golden order, an ideological and political framework designed to bring all of the lands between under the benevolent yet absolute sway of the Erdtree. As part of this sweeping initiative, the Golden Order began to systematically erase traces of the Serpent's influence, viewing it as an existential threat to its burgeoning hegemony. Ancient rituals, forgotten shrines, and even oral traditions that spoke of the Great Serpent, a cosmic entity associated with primordial life and death cycles, were suppressed or outright destroyed. The very memory of anything that challenged the Erdtree's singular truth was to be expunged, ensuring that its golden light shone unchallenged across the land. This systematic erasure was not merely about religious conversion. It was about rewriting history, about controlling the narrative, and about eliminating any potential sources of dissent or alternative power. The Serpent, representing chaos and cyclical destruction, was anathema to the Erdtree's promise of eternal life and ordered growth. Yet, despite Marika's best efforts, the ancient ways persisted in secret. Messmer's family, perhaps descendants of those who had worshipped the Great Serpent in ages past, or perhaps simply guardians of forbidden knowledge, ensured that this legacy endured. They taught him the ancient ways of the Serpent, passing down forbidden knowledge that spoke of primordial currents, of the cyclical nature of existence, and of a power that predated the Erdtree itself. These teachings included not only rituals and incantations, but also a philosophical understanding of the world that stood in stark contrast to the Erdtree's linear, hierarchical view. They showed him how to channel the chaotic energies of the serpent, how to wield its destructive yet transformative power, and how to embrace the duality of creation and destruction that the Erdtree sought to deny. This clandestine education was a dangerous act of defiance, a direct challenge to the burgeoning authority of the Golden Order. As the Golden Order's grip tightened, its rigid doctrines and unwavering demands for conformity began to alienate many, those who felt disenfranchised, those who clung to older traditions, and those who simply yearned for something beyond the Erdtree's golden embrace began to seek alternative paths. In the shadows, away from the prying eyes of Marika's loyalists, the Serpent's cult grew in secret. It attracted those disillusioned with the Erdtree's rigid order, those who saw its promises of eternal life as a gilded cage, and those who longed for a return to a more primal, unfettered existence. This cult was not a monolithic entity, but a loose confederation of like-minded individuals bound by their shared reverence for the serpent and their rejection of the Erdtree's increasingly oppressive rule. They met in hidden groves, in forgotten catacombs, and in the deepest recesses of the earth, whispering tales of the great serpent's ancient power and dreaming of a world where chaos and creation danced hand in hand. It was within this burgeoning underground movement that Messmer, with his unique blend of noble lineage and serpentine power, became a figurehead for the serpent's followers. He embodied their hopes for a return to chaos, a disruption of the established order, and a reclamation of the ancient ways. His presence was a beacon, a living testament to the possibility of resistance, and a symbol of the power that lay dormant beneath the Erdtree's veneer of stability. He was charismatic, powerful, and undeniably dangerous, a leader who could inspire both fervent loyalty and profound fear. His very existence was a challenge to Marika's authority, a living embodiment of the forces she sought to suppress. He represented a future where the Erdtree's dominance was not absolute, a future where the primordial chaos of the serpent could once again assert itself. The Erdtree's enforcers, a dedicated and ruthless cadre of Marika's loyalists, were not oblivious to these burgeoning threats. As reports of clandestine gatherings and strange, fiery rituals began to filter back to the capital, they initiated a systematic campaign to root out and eliminate any opposition. They began hunting down serpent sympathizers with brutal efficiency, viewing them as heretics and traitors to the Golden Order. These enforcers, often clad in the distinctive golden armor of the Landel Knights, were relentless in their pursuit, leaving a trail of destruction and fear in their wake. They were motivated by unwavering loyalty to Marika and a fervent belief in the righteousness of the Erdtree's cause, seeing themselves as purifiers, cleansing the land of dangerous impurities. It was only a matter of time before the net tightened. Messmer's family, despite their best efforts to remain hidden, was eventually discovered. This forced them into an impossible choice: deeper hiding, a desperate attempt to evade the Golden Order's relentless pursuit, or outright confrontation, a suicidal act of defiance against an overwhelmingly superior force. The details of their discovery remain shrouded in mystery, but it is clear that the Golden Order's intelligence network was extensive and effective. Perhaps a betrayal, a careless whisper, or simply an unlucky encounter led to their unmasking. Regardless of the specifics, the revelation of their allegiance to the Serpent was a catastrophic blow, signaling the beginning of the end for their clandestine existence. The inevitable clash occurred. A pivotal battle erupted between Messmer's kin, those who had sworn allegiance to the Serpent and to his family's ancient traditions, and the Erdtree's forces. This was not a skirmish, but a full-scale engagement, a desperate struggle for survival against the overwhelming might of the Golden Order. The clash was fierce and bloody, a testament to the unwavering conviction of both sides. The Serpent's followers, though outnumbered and outmatched in conventional warfare, fought with a desperate ferocity, fueled by their ancient beliefs and their loyalty to Messmer's family. The Erdtree's forces, equally zealous, pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. The result was a devastating conflict, a brutal purge that resulted in heavy losses on both sides. The air would have been thick with the smell of blood and burning flesh, the ground stained with the lives of those who dared to defy the Golden Order. This battle was a stark demonstration of the Erdtree's willingness to use extreme violence to maintain its absolute authority. Amidst the carnage and devastation, Messmer, through a combination of his innate power and perhaps sheer luck, survived the purge. He emerged from the crucible of battle, battered but unbroken, his heart ablaze with a searing hatred for the forces that had destroyed his family and shattered his world. In the wake of this catastrophic loss, he vowed vengeance against the Erdtree and Marika's Golden Order. This was not a fleeting promise, but a deep-seated, unshakable oath, forged in the fires of grief and rage. He would dedicate his existence to dismantling the very foundations of the Erdtree's dominion, to bringing about its downfall, and to ushering in a new era where the Serpent's power reigned supreme. His survival was not merely an escape, it was a rebirth, a transformation into an agent of retribution. And as Messmer nursed his wounds and cultivated his hatred, the Serpent within him grew stronger. The trauma of the purge, the raw grief for his lost kin, and the burning desire for vengeance acted as a catalyst, fueling his rage and determination. The chaotic energies that had always resided within him now surged with renewed intensity, transforming him into an even more formidable and terrifying force. The Serpent, a symbol of primordial chaos and cyclical destruction, embraced its host, empowering him with a destructive potential that would one day threaten the very existence of the Erdtree. This was the beginning of Messmer's true ascent, a path paved with fire and fueled by an unquenchable thirst for retribution against the Golden Order that had taken everything from him. The stage was set for a conflict of cosmic proportions, a clash between the ordered grace of the Erdtree and the primordial chaos of the Serpent, with Messmer at its fiery heart. Messmer, however, was not content to merely survive in the shadows. He began to actively gather a new following, seeking out those who, like him, felt alienated by the Erdtree's increasingly pervasive influence. He spoke to the dispossessed, the marginalized, and the heretics, those who clung to older traditions or simply refused to bend the knee to the Golden Order. These were the outcasts, the remnants of cultures and beliefs that predated the Erdtree's ascendancy, or those who had been cast aside by its rigid dogma. Messmer offered them not just refuge, but a cause, a purpose beyond mere survival. He articulated a vision of liberation, of a return to a more primal, unfettered existence, free from the suffocating embrace of the greater will's dominion. His charisma, coupled with the palpable injustice of the Erdtree's expansion, resonated deeply with these disparate groups. As his following grew, Messmer shrewdly established hidden strongholds in the fringe of the lands between, strategically chosen to be beyond the Erdtree's immediate reach. These were not grand fortresses, but rather clandestine encampments, fortified caves, and forgotten ruins, often located in treacherous terrain or areas deemed undesirable by the Golden Order. We can imagine these early enclaves nestled within the shadowed valleys of the mountain tops of the giants, or perhaps deep within the volcanic reaches of Mount Gelmir, or even in the forgotten depths beneath the Weeping Peninsula. These locations provided both sanctuary and a base of operations, allowing Messmer's nascent rebellion to coalesce and strengthen away from the prying eyes of Marika's champions. Here, new recruits were trained, ancient lore was shared, and the seeds of a true resistance were sown. Messmer's reputation as a rebel leader, a defiant voice against the prevailing order, grew with each successful recruitment and every clandestine operation. Whispers of his fiery sermons and his unwavering conviction spread through the undercurrents of society, reaching even the ears of Queen Marika and her loyal champions. To Marika, Messmer represented a dangerous anomaly, a direct challenge to the divine right and absolute authority she had so carefully cultivated. His existence was a living testament to the fact that her Golden Order was not universally accepted. The dissent, however suppressed, still simmered beneath the surface. For her champions, figures like Godfrey, Radagon, and the various Knights of the Crucible, Messmer was a target, a heretic to be eradicated, a threat to the stability and sanctity of the Erdtree. The Golden Order, at its core, was about absolute control and unwavering devotion, and Messmer embodied the antithesis of both. Crucially, the Serpent within, the ancient chthonic entity Messmer had embraced, became a powerful rallying symbol for this burgeoning dissent. Its influence, initially confined to Messmer and his inner circle, began to spread through his followers, a counter-narrative to the Erdtree's golden light. The Serpent represented chaos, primordial power, and a rejection of the rigid, ordered existence dictated by the greater will. It was a symbol of rebellion, of the untamed, and of the power that lay beyond the Erdtree's grasp. Despite the Erdtree's dominance, its pervasive presence, and the Golden Order's relentless propaganda, the Serpent's allure proved potent for those who felt stifled and oppressed. Its imagery, often depicted in stylized forms, began to appear in hidden places, etched into stone or woven into clandestine banners, a silent defiance against the omnipresent Erdtree sigil. In their hidden strongholds, Messmer's followers began to perform rituals to honor the Serpent, invoking its chaotic power against the Erdtree. These were not the meticulously structured, light-filled incantations of the Golden Order, but rather wilder, more primal ceremonies, often involving fire, blood, and ancient chants. They sought to tap into the raw, untamed energy of the Serpent, believing it could provide them with the strength and guidance needed to dismantle the Erdtree's hegemony. These rituals were acts of profound blasphemy in the eyes of the Golden Order, direct affronts to the divine authority of the Erdtree and the greater will. They were a declaration of war, not just on a physical level, but on a spiritual and ideological one. The power they sought was not the ordered grace of the Erdtree, but the disruptive, transformative energy of the primordial. Unsurprisingly, Marika's Golden Order intensified its efforts to root out the Serpent's influence, leading to widespread persecution. The burgeoning rebellion was not merely a political threat, but a spiritual contagion, an affront to the very foundation of Marika's reign. Inquisitors and zealous knights were dispatched to scour the lands between, hunting down anyone suspected of harboring sympathy for Messmer or the Serpent. This period saw an escalation of violence and repression, with trials, executions, and the burning of suspected heretics becoming increasingly common. The Golden Order, in its pursuit of absolute purity and unwavering devotion, became increasingly ruthless, its methods mirroring the very tyranny Messmer sought to overthrow. Villages were razed, families torn apart, and ancient traditions suppressed, all in the name of preserving the Erdtree's absolute dominion. The persecution was designed to instill fear, to break the will of the populace, and to ensure that no challenge to the Golden Order could ever take root. Amidst this escalating persecution, Messmer orchestrated covert strikes against the Erdtree's sanctuaries, carefully chosen targets designed to undermine its authority and sow doubt among its adherents. These were not direct assaults on major fortresses, which would have been suicidal for his still developing forces. Instead, they were surgical strikes against smaller shrines, isolated outposts of the Golden Order, or even symbolic targets like sacred groves believed to be connected to the Erdtree's roots. These attacks were meant to be demoralizing, to demonstrate that the Erdtree was not inviolable, and that even in its sacred spaces it could be challenged. Imagine small bands of Messmer's followers, shrouded in darkness, slipping into a remote Golden Order chapel, defacing its altar, or destroying its sacred relics, leaving behind only the symbol of the serpent as a defiant message. These acts, though seemingly minor, chipped away at the aura of invincibility that surrounded the Erdtree, fostering a sense of vulnerability and unease within the Golden Order. As the persecution intensified and Messmer's strikes grew bolder, the conflict between Messmer's faction and the Erdtree's enforcers escalated into a full-blown, albeit largely clandestine, war. This was not a conventional war fought on open battlefields, but a brutal shadow conflict characterized by guerrilla tactics, espionage, and brutal reprisals. The stability of the new order so painstakingly established by Marika began to fray at the edges. Trust eroded, suspicion became rampant, and the once unquestioned authority of the Golden Order was now openly challenged. The lands between, which Marika had sought to unite under a single golden banner, became a battleground of ideologies, a fractured realm where loyalty was constantly tested. The conflict was a stark reminder that even the most powerful hegemonies could be challenged, and that the seeds of dissent, once planted, could blossom into a formidable rebellion. The Erdtree, once a symbol of unwavering prosperity, now cast a long, oppressive shadow, and Messmer's growing resistance was a direct consequence of that oppression. Ultimately, Messmer's ultimate goal became clear to all. He sought to sever the greater will's control by destroying the Erdtree's hegemony. This was not merely about political power or personal vengeance. It was a cosmic struggle, a rebellion against the very fabric of existence as dictated by the outer god. Messmer believed that the greater will, through the Erdtree, had imposed an unnatural order upon the lands between, stifling its true potential and chaining its inhabitants to a predetermined fate. He envisioned a world freed from this divine puppetry, a return to the raw, untamed essence of the cosmos, where beings could forge their own destinies without the oppressive hand of an outer god. His ambition was nothing less than a complete revolution, a dismantling of the entire cosmic hierarchy, and the Erdtree, as the greater will's primary conduit and symbol of its dominion, was the ultimate target. This was a war for the soul of the lands between, a fight for genuine freedom against what Messmer perceived as a gilded cage. He aimed to burn away the false light of the Erdtree, to shatter the Golden Order, and to unleash the primordial chaos that he believed held the true promise of liberation. Previous section ends, and thus the Golden Order, under the Erdtree's benevolent but absolute dominion, began its long reign, shaping the very fabric of the lands between. However, even as the Erdtree's golden light spread across the land, casting long shadows of conformity, a different kind of power, ancient and serpentine, stirred beneath the surface. Our timeline now shifts, moving into the Messmer tree era, a period marked by the Erdtree's undisputed dominance, yet also by the quiet genesis of a rebellion that would shake its foundations. This era, while seemingly stable, harbored a secret, a hidden lineage that would eventually erupt into open conflict. It is here that we encounter Messmer, a figure whose very existence was a paradox to the Golden Order. Born of Queen Marika, the very deity of the Erdtree, and the Serpent, an ancient primordial entity, Messmer's lineage was, by the Erdtree's standards, tainted. The Serpent, a creature of immense power in antiquity, represented a pre-Erdtree order, a time when different cosmic principles held sway. Its essence, woven into Messmer's very being, made him an anomaly, a potential threat to the carefully constructed purity of the Golden Order. Consequently, Messmer was hidden from the Erdtree's gaze. Imagine the sheer audacity, the clandestine maneuvers required to conceal a child of Marika herself. This wasn't merely about keeping a secret, it was about protecting an existential threat from the all-seeing, all-knowing influence of the Erdtree, a colossal entity whose roots and branches permeated reality itself. The Erdtree's omnipresence meant that even whispers of such a birth could trigger immediate and severe repercussions. Marika, ever the enigmatic figure, must have orchestrated this concealment with a precision born of desperation and foresight, understanding the profound implications of Messmer's dual heritage. The very act of his concealment speaks volumes about the Golden Order's intolerance for deviation and the depth of the Serpent's influence, reaching even into the heart of the divine. In the shadowed corners of the lands between, far from the gilded halls of the Erdtree capital, Messmer grew, honing his abilities in secret. His training was unlike that of any other demigod. While his siblings, like Godfrey's children, or even Radigan's, were tutored in the martial arts of the Golden Order or the intricacies of fundamentalism, Messmer delved into a different kind of power. He mastered both martial prowess, developing a formidable skill with weapons and combat tactics, and the arcane powers of the Serpent. This wasn't merely learning a few spells, it was an immersion into a primordial magic, a power that predated the Golden Order and operated on entirely different principles. The Serpent's magic was raw, elemental, often manifesting as venomous flames or constricting shadows, a stark contrast to the radiant, healing incantations of the Erdtree. This dual mastery made Messmer a uniquely dangerous individual, capable of engaging in direct combat with the most skilled knights while simultaneously unleashing devastating, forbidden sorceries. His martial training likely involved relentless drills and encounters with dangerous beasts or rogue elements, forging a warrior capable of facing down the Erdtree's finest. The Serpent's arcane teachings, on the other hand, would have involved communion with ancient energies, perhaps even direct interaction with the Serpent itself, drawing upon its vast, forgotten knowledge. The Serpent, an ancient entity whose dominion over the lands between predated even the coming of the Greater Will and the Erdtree, was not merely a passive source of power. It was an active force, opposed to the Erdtree's reign, and it saw in Messmer a potential instrument for its resurgence. It imbued Messmer with its essence, not just a portion, but a profound infusion that granted him immense strength. This wasn't a simple blessing, it was a merging of wills, a deep connection that allowed Messmer to channel the serpent's primal power almost effortlessly. This essence manifested not only in his magical abilities, but also in his physical form, perhaps subtly altering his appearance, giving him a serpentine grace or an unnerving intensity in his gaze. This infusion would have been a transformative experience, granting him a resilience and power that far exceeded that of ordinary mortals, and likely even surpassed many of his demigod kin who relied solely on the Erdtree's grace. The serpent's motives were clear: to reclaim its lost dominion, to shatter the golden facade of the Erdtree, and Messmer, its chosen vessel, was the key. As Messmer matured, so too did his understanding of his unique heritage. He discovered the truth of his birth, learning of the serpent's ancient dominion over the lands between. This revelation would have been a seismic shift in his worldview. He was not merely a hidden demigod, but the scion of a forgotten age, a living testament to a power that the Erdtree had sought to erase from history. The serpent's dominion was not just a historical footnote. It was a period when the very landscape of the lands between resonated with a different kind of energy, when life and death were understood through a different lens, and when the cosmic order was entirely distinct from the greater will's influence. Learning this truth would have instilled in Messmer a profound sense of purpose, a destiny intertwined with the fate of the ancient serpent. He would have understood that the Erdtree's reign, while long and seemingly absolute, was merely one chapter in a much grander, more ancient narrative. This knowledge, coupled with his innate power, fueled a growing resentment towards the Erdtree and its oppressive uniformity. Armed with this knowledge and his formidable powers, Messmer began to gather followers, individuals disillusioned with the Erdtree's dominance. The Erdtree, for all its golden promises, had its detractors. Its rigid dogma, its suppressions of alternative faiths and practices, and its often unseen cruelties had created a simmering discontent among various factions. Messmer offered an alternative, a return to a more ancient, perhaps more chaotic, but certainly less restrictive order. His charisma, his raw power, and the compelling narrative of his heritage drew in those who felt marginalized or outright oppressed by the Golden Order. These followers were not merely rebels, they were often remnants of older faiths, practitioners of forgotten magics, or those who simply yearned for a world beyond the Erdtree's suffocating embrace. They included disillusioned knights who had seen the hypocrisy of the Golden Order, scholars who delved into forbidden lore, and common folk who suffered under the Erdtree's often indifferent rule. This was not a sudden uprising, but a slow, careful accretion of power, a clandestine network forming beneath the very nose of the Golden Order. To establish his base, Messmer chose the Shadowlands, a region shrouded from the Erdtree's light. This choice was both strategic and symbolic. The Shadowlands, by their very nature, existed outside the direct influence of the Erdtree. They were places of mystery, often wild and untamed, where the Erdtree's grace struggled to penetrate. This made them ideal for a rebellion, offering natural concealment and a degree of protection from the Erdtree's ever-watchful eyes. The very name Shadowlands evokes a sense of otherness, of being beyond the established order, a perfect haven for those who defied the golden light. Within these shadowed confines, Messmer established his stronghold, a place where his followers could train, strategize, and practice their forbidden arts without fear of immediate reprisal. It was a place where the serpent's influence could truly flourish, where the ancient energies were more potent, and where the seeds of rebellion could be nurtured in secrecy. Messmer, ever the shrewd strategist, understood the power of alliances. He sought out and forged alliances with the remnants of the dragon cult, who harbored a deep seated resentment towards the Erdtree's suppression of their faith. The dragon cult, an ancient religion that revered the dragons and their power, had been largely eradicated or forced underground by the Golden Order. Their practices, centered around draconic communion and the mastery of lightning, were deemed heretical by the Erdtree. Messmer, with his own connection to ancient non-Erdtree power, presented himself as a natural ally. He offered them a chance to reclaim their heritage, to openly practice their faith, and to exact vengeance upon those who had suppressed them for so long. The dragons themselves, or at least their surviving champions, might have seen in Messmer a potential liberator, a figure who could restore their ancient glory. This alliance brought a formidable new dimension to Messmer's forces, adding the devastating power of dragon incantations and the martial prowess of dragon knights to his growing army. This was not merely a tactical move, it was a powerful statement, uniting disparate forces against a common, all encompassing enemy. The time for clandestine operations eventually gave way to open conflict. Messmer's rebellion launched its first attack on an Erdtree outpost, a brazen act that marked the beginning of open warfare. This wasn't a minor skirmish, it was a calculated strike, designed to send a clear message to the Golden Order. The target would have been strategically important, perhaps a supply depot, a communication hub, or a symbol of Erdtree authority in a contested region. The attack would have been swift and devastating, utilizing Messmer's combined martial and arcane might, along with the newly acquired strength of his dragon cult allies. This first strike was a declaration of war, an undeniable challenge to the Erdtree's supremacy, shattering the illusion of its unchallenged reign. The roar of dragon lightning, the hiss of serpentine flames, and the clash of steel would have echoed through the night, a symphony of defiance against the golden silence of the Erdtree. This moment was a turning point, transforming a hidden rebellion into a full-blown war, forcing the Golden Order to acknowledge the threat it had so long ignored. As the conflict intensified, the Serpent's influence spread further through Messmer's followers. It wasn't just Messmer who wielded its power. His most devoted adherents began to manifest unnatural abilities. This could have included enhanced physical strength, resistance to conventional attacks, or even minor arcane talents mirroring Messmer's own serpentine magic. This widespread infusion of power would have been a terrifying development for the Erdtree's forces, who were accustomed to fighting enemies that adhered to predictable patterns. Now, they faced foes who seemed to defy the very laws of nature, empowered by a primordial force they barely understood. This wasn't merely about morale, it was a tangible advantage, making Messmer's forces more resilient, more deadly, and far more unpredictable. The Serpent's essence, once confined to Messmer, was now a contagion, spreading through his army, transforming them into something more than mere mortals, something truly formidable. In a pivotal moment of the early conflict, Messmer confronted and decisively defeated a high-ranking Erdtree knight. This wasn't just any knight. It would have been a celebrated champion, a paragon of the Golden Order, perhaps even one of the Crucible Knights, or a prominent member of Radagon's retinue. The defeat of such a figure sent shockwaves through the Erdtree's forces, earning Messmer both fear and grudging respect among his enemies. It was a public demonstration of his overwhelming power, a clear signal that he was not to be underestimated. This victory would have solidified his reputation as a truly formidable opponent, not just a demigod with a grievance, but a warrior capable of challenging the very best the Golden Order had to offer. The details of this confrontation, whether it was a duel of skill or a brutal display of arcane might, would have been recounted in hushed tones across the lands between, further fueling the legend of Messmer the Impaler, the Serpent's son. The Erdtree's forces, initially perhaps dismissive or slow to react, could no longer ignore the escalating threat. Led by Radagon, Queen Marika's second consort and a powerful champion of the Golden Order, they mobilized to crush the rebellion. Radagon, a figure of immense power and unwavering loyalty to the Erdtree, viewed Messmer as a grave threat, not just to the Golden Order, but perhaps even to the cosmic balance itself. His response would have been swift and decisive, deploying legions of Erdtree knights, Lindell soldiers, and powerful sorcerers from the Academy of Raya Lucarian, all united under the banner of the Golden Order. This mobilization marked the full-scale commitment of the Erdtree's might, transforming what began as a localized uprising into a full-blown war that would engulf vast swathes of the lands between. The stage was set for a conflict of epic proportions, a clash between the established order and a primordial power seeking to reclaim its ancient dominion. Continues to next section. Though embers of defiance, once scattered, ignited into a full-blown conflagration across the lands between, Messmer, no longer content with mere skirmishes, escalated his campaign, launching a daring ambush on an Erdtree caravan. This was no ordinary raiding party. Messmer's forces, a motley crew of disillusioned soldiers, disenfranchised commoners, and those who simply yearned for a world beyond the Golden Order's rigid dogma, targeted the caravan with surgical precision. Their objective was not mere plunder, but the acquisition of sacred artifacts, relics imbued with the Erdtree's power, items that symbolize the very authority Messmer sought to dismantle. Imagine, if you will, the shock and outrage within the Golden Order as reports flooded in. A consecrated procession, protected by seasoned knights and blessed by the Two Fingers themselves, had been utterly routed. The loss of these artifacts, though perhaps not immediately crippling to the Erdtree's vast power, was a profound symbolic blow, a public declaration that Messmer was not merely a brigand, but a formidable challenger to their divine right to rule. Each seized relic was a chipped scale from the Golden Order's gilded armor, a tangible weakening of their spiritual and political dominion. The success of this audacious strike sent ripples throughout the lands between, emboldening others who chafed under the Erdtree's unwavering gaze. The rebellion, once confined to the shadowed fringes, now spread like wildfire, reaching even the elevated plateaus of the Altus. Here, amidst the gilded spires and ancient ruins, Messmer found fertile ground for his revolutionary ideology. The Altus Plateau, though ostensibly a bastion of Erdtree loyalty, harbored a deep undercurrent of discontent. Many noble houses, once proud and independent, had seen their influence wane, their lands annexed, and their traditions subsumed by the encroaching uniformity of the Golden Order. Messmer, with his fiery rhetoric and his promise of a return to a more diverse, less centralized power structure, resonated deeply with these disenfranchised nobles. They saw in him not just a rebel, but a potential liberator, a figure who could restore their lost prestige and carve out a new future where their ancestral rights were respected, not merely tolerated. Their support, though often clandestine at first, provided Messmer with vital resources, strategic intelligence, and perhaps most importantly, a veneer of legitimacy that elevated his cause beyond simple brigandage. It was during this period of growing influence that Messmer encountered a young Tarnished. This was not a preordained meeting, nor a planned recruitment, but a chance encounter on the fringes of a battle. The Tarnished, a warrior stripped of grace and exiled from the Erdtree's blessing, fought with a desperate ferocity, a raw defiance that Messmer recognized instantly. Instead of striking them down, Messmer, in a rare display of mercy amidst the brutal realities of war, spared the Tarnished's life. He saw in them not an enemy, but a kindred spirit, a reflection of his own rejection of the established order. The Tarnished, like Messmer, embodied a defiance against the Erdtree's absolute authority, a living testament to the fact that not all were content to live under its golden shadow. This encounter, though perhaps minor in the grand scheme of the rebellion, was significant for Messmer. It solidified his belief that his cause transcended mere political ambition. It was a struggle for the very soul of the lands between, a fight for the right of individuals to forge their own destiny, free from the Erdtree's suffocating embrace. He saw potential in this nameless warrior, a spark of the same rebellious fire that fueled his own crusade. As Messmer's rebellion gained momentum, the enigmatic serpent within, the ancient serpentine entity that had long whispered to him, intensified its counsel. Its prophecies, once cryptic and veiled, became clearer, more direct, guiding Messmer's strategic decisions and bolstering his resolve. The serpent spoke of ancient powers, forgotten truths, and a destiny intertwined with the very fabric of the lands between. It revealed vulnerabilities within the Golden Order, weaknesses in their defenses, and predicted the movements of their armies. These whispers were not mere suggestions, they were profound insights, born from an intelligence far older and more encompassing than any mortal mind. The serpent within, a creature of primordial chaos and ancient wisdom, understood the underlying currents of power that flowed through the Erdtree's roots and branches. Its guidance was invaluable, transforming Messmer from a skilled tactician into a visionary leader, one whose campaigns seemed to anticipate and counter the Golden Order's moves with uncanny accuracy. This symbiotic relationship, this unholy alliance between man and ancient serpent, was the true engine of Messmer's growing power, a secret weapon that confounded and terrified his enemies. The serpent's pronouncements instilled in Messmer an unshakable confidence, a belief in his ultimate victory, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The inevitable clash between Messmer's burgeoning rebellion and the entrenched might of the Golden Order finally erupted at the Stormvale outskirts. This was no skirmish, but a massive, pitched battle, a confluence of forces that would determine the immediate future of the lands between. Messmer's army, though diverse and fiercely loyal, was still an underdog against the disciplined legions of the Golden Order, bolstered by their faith in the Erdtree and their superior armaments. The air thrummed with the clash of steel, the roar of war cries, and the crackle of incantations. Messmer himself, a formidable warrior, led from the front, his serpentine power manifesting in devastating attacks that cleaved through enemy ranks. His forces, fueled by their conviction and Messmer's inspiring leadership, fought with a desperate courage, pushing back the Golden Order's initial advances. They achieved significant early victories, demonstrating that the Erdtree's dominion was not unassailable, that even its most formidable champions could be challenged. The Stormvale outskirts became a crucible, forging the legend of Messmer the Impaler, a name that would soon strike fear into the hearts of Erdtree loyalists. However, despite these initial triumphs, the sheer overwhelming numbers of the Erdtree's armies began to tell. The Golden Order, drawing upon the vast resources of its dominion, could field an endless tide of soldiers, replenishing their losses with grim efficiency. Messmer's forces, though spirited, were finite. Each victory, hard won and costly, chipped away at their strength, leaving them vulnerable to the relentless onslaught. The tide of battle slowly, inexorably, began to turn. The Golden Order's knights, clad in their gleaming armor, pressed their advantage, their faith unwavering, their resolve bolstered by the belief that they fought for a divine cause. Messmer's rebellion, for all its fervor, was simply outmatched in terms of sheer manpower and logistical support. The battlefield, once a testament to their defiance, became a grim tableau of their dwindling strength. The losses were heavy, a sobering reminder that even the most righteous cause could be crushed by overwhelming force. Recognizing the futility of continuing to engage in a direct attritional war, Messmer made the difficult decision to retreat. He withdrew his remaining forces to the Shadowlands, a region shrouded in mystery and legend, a place where the Erdtree's influence was tenuous at best. This was not a surrender, but a strategic repositioning, a tactical withdrawal designed to preserve his remaining strength and regroup. The Shadowlands, with its treacherous terrain and ancient forgotten defenses, offered a natural bastion against the Golden Order's advance. Here, Messmer began the arduous task of fortifying his position, transforming the rugged landscape into an impregnable stronghold. He knew that the Erdtree would not simply let him lick his wounds. They would pursue him relentlessly, determined to extinguish the flame of his rebellion once and for all. The Shadowlands became his sanctuary, his last redoubt, a place where he could rebuild his army, refine his strategy, and prepare for the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. The retreat was a bitter pill to swallow, a temporary setback, but Messmer's resolve remained unbroken. He understood that sometimes, to win the war, one must first survive the battle. Indeed, the Erdtree's response was swift and merciless. Radagon, the Golden Order's foremost champion, a figure of immense power and unwavering loyalty to the Erdtree, personally led a massive siege on Messmer's stronghold in the Shadowlands. Radagon, a demigod of unparalleled martial prowess and a fervent believer in the Golden Order's divine right, was determined to eradicate the rebellion and crush Messmer once and for all. This was not merely a punitive expedition, it was a declaration of total war, a clear message that the Erdtree would tolerate no challenge to its authority. The siege was a brutal affair, a prolonged and bloody struggle for control of the Shadowlands. Radagon's forces, equipped with siege engines and potent incantations, battered against Messmer's defenses, relentlessly seeking to breach his stronghold. The air was thick with the dust of crumbling stone and the acrid scent of battle magic. The Shadowlands, once a place of quiet mystery, became a theater of war, a testament to the Erdtree's relentless pursuit of its enemies. In the climactic confrontation, Messmer himself emerged to confront Radagon in a duel. This was no ordinary clash of warriors. It was a battle of ideologies, a contest between the established order and the forces of rebellion. a direct challenge to the Erdtree's champion. Messmer, wielding the power of the serpent within, his flame-wreathed spear striking with devastating force, met Radagon's divine might head-on. The serpent's power, a raw, untamed energy that defied the Golden Order's principles, allowed Messmer to hold his ground against the Erdtree's champion, a feat few could ever hope to achieve. Their duel was a spectacle of power, a clash of demigods that shook the very foundations of the Shadowlands. Radagon, with his signature Golden Order incantations and his formidable greatsword, fought with the unwavering conviction of a zealot, while Messmer, fueled by the serpent's ancient magic and his burning desire for liberation, matched him blow for blow. The ground beneath them cracked, the air shimmered with arcane energies, and the heavens themselves seemed to watch in awe as these two titans grappled for supremacy. The duel, a testament to the immense power of both combatants, ultimately ended in a stalemate. Neither Messmer nor Radagon could gain a decisive advantage, their wills and powers locked in an unbreakable deadlock. However, while the duel itself yielded no clear victor, the surrounding battle had taken a devastating toll on Messmer's forces. Despite their leader's heroic stand, the sheer numbers of Radagon's army had decimated the rebellion. Messmer's stronghold, though not fully breached, was no longer defensible, his remaining soldiers scattered and broken. With his army shattered and his position untenable, Messmer was forced to flee, disappearing into the hidden depths of the Shadowlands, a ghost in the very lands he sought to liberate. His rebellion, though not entirely extinguished, was severely crippled, its immediate threat neutralized. The dream of a new order, for now, had been deferred. In the aftermath, the Erdtree's followers, relieved by Radagon's apparent victory, wasted no time in declaring Messmer a heretic. They painted him as a monstrous figure, a blasphemer who consorted with ancient, unholy powers, a threat to the very fabric of existence. The Golden Order's propagandists worked tirelessly, spreading fear of the serpent within among the populace, demonizing Messmer's cause, and solidifying their own authority. They depicted the serpent as a harbinger of chaos, a corrupting influence that sought to unravel the divine order established by the Erdtree. This narrative, carefully crafted and relentlessly disseminated, served to isolate Messmer, turning public opinion against him and ensuring that any future attempts at rebellion would be met with widespread condemnation. Messmer, once a symbol of hope for the disenfranchised, became a bogeyman, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones, his name synonymous with heresy and destruction. The fear of the serpent within became a powerful tool in the Erdtree's arsenal, a means of controlling the populace and suppressing any lingering dissent. The rebellion was quelled, but the seeds of discontent remained, buried deep beneath the veneer of the Golden Order's triumph. Messmer, though defeated, was not forgotten, his legend destined to linger in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to re-emerge. Messmer, despite his ultimate defeat, transcended the role of a mere general. He became a potent symbol of resistance, an ember of defiance that continued to glow even after the flames of his rebellion were seemingly extinguished. Whispers of his courage, his unwavering conviction, and his terrifying power spread like wildfire through the downtrodden and the disaffected across the lands between. These were not open declarations of support, for the Erdtree's grip was too absolute, but hushed conversations in shadowed alleys, coded messages exchanged among sympathetic merchants, and defiant glances cast by those who felt the weight of the Golden Order's oppressive grace. His image, often distorted and embellished through countless retellings, became a rallying cry for those who yearned for a different future, a world unshackled from the golden tyranny. The very mention of his name, even in hushed tones, was enough to stir a flicker of hope in the hearts of the oppressed, a dangerous sentiment that the Erdtree's zealous enforcers struggled to fully suppress. With Messmer's defeat, the serpent within, the insidious entity that had so profoundly influenced him, was forced to retreat into the realm of myth and legend. Its physical manifestation, if it ever truly had one beyond its symbiotic link with Messmer, vanished from the sight of mortals. Yet its influence, though no longer overt, lingered like a venomous miasma in the shadows of the lands between. Tales of its ancient power, its cunning, and its insatiable hunger for chaos became cautionary fables whispered around campfires, designed to instill fear and obedience in the populace. Scholars of the Golden Order, desperate to erase all traces of its existence, attempted to reframe its story, portraying it as a demonic aberration, a force of pure evil that Messmer, in his misguided ambition, had foolishly embraced. But among those who remembered the true history, who understood the serpent's primordial connection to the very fabric of the world, its presence was still felt, a latent threat waiting for the opportune moment to reassert its influence. Its essence, a blend of ancient magic and forbidden knowledge, continued to subtly corrupt the land, manifesting in strange blights, unusual mutations, and the occasional unsettling tremor that rattled the foundations of even the most steadfast Erdtree strongholds. This lingering presence, though unseen, served as a constant, unsettling reminder that the world was not as orderly or as fully subjugated as the Golden Order wished it to be. Messmer's surviving followers, a disparate collection of disillusioned knights, marginalized sorcerers, and disenfranchised common folk, found themselves scattered to the winds after their leader's fall. They became a diaspora of dissent, carrying the legacy of his rebellion to distant regions of the lands between, far from the watchful eyes of the Erdtree's zealous inquisitors. Some sought refuge in the treacherous depths of the Weeping Peninsula, finding common cause with the downtrodden and the forgotten. Others ventured into the desolate reaches of Caelid, where the scarlet rot had already sown seeds of chaos and despair, making it a fertile ground for anti-Erdtree sentiment. A few, perhaps the most devoted or the most desperate, even dared to cross the treacherous seas to the isolated islands of the Dragon Communion, hoping to find allies among the ancient, draconic powers that predated the Erdtree's reign. With them, they carried not only the tales of Messmer's defiance, but also fragments of his forbidden knowledge, whispered spells, and unorthodox fighting techniques that defied the rigid dogma of the Golden Order. These individuals, often operating in secret, formed clandestine networks, sharing information, offering aid to those persecuted by the Erdtree, and subtly undermining its authority wherever they could. They became the silent guardians of Messmer's dream, ensuring that the flame of rebellion, though flickering, never truly died out. Their mere existence, a testament to Messmer's enduring impact, was a thorn in the side of the Erdtree, a constant reminder that not all had bent the knee. In the wake of Messmer's rebellion, the Erdtree, feeling its dominance challenged in a way it hadn't experienced in centuries, tightened its grip on the lands between with an iron fist. The Golden Order, its ruling religious and political body, responded with increased vigilance and an even more fervent suppression of any perceived dissent. New edicts were issued, restricting travel, increasing surveillance, and imposing harsher penalties for even minor transgressions against the Erdtree's teachings. The tarnished, those who had lost the guidance of grace and were often seen as outsiders or potential threats, found themselves subjected to even greater scrutiny and persecution. The Knights Cavalry, the fearsome mounted knights of the Golden Order, patrolled the highways and byways with renewed ferocity, their imposing figures a constant reminder of the Erdtree's omnipresent power. Inquisitors, zealous priests, armed with the authority to judge and condemn, fanned out across the land, rooting out any pockets of rebellion, however small or nascent. Public executions became more frequent, serving as grim spectacles designed to instill fear and discourage any thoughts of defiance. The Erdtree's golden light, once seen as a beacon of benevolent guidance, now felt more like an oppressive glare, illuminating every shadow, leaving no room for independent thought or action. This era marked a significant shift from a period of relative, albeit controlled, peace to one of heightened paranoia and authoritarian control, fundamentally altering the social and political landscape of the lands between. The Golden Order's response was a clear declaration: dissent would not be tolerated, and the Erdtree's dominion was absolute, to be maintained by any means necessary. As a direct consequence of this intensified crackdown, Messmer's name was systematically erased from official records. Scribes of the Golden Order were tasked with meticulously scrubbing his existence from historical accounts, royal genealogies, and even the very stones of monuments. His achievements were attributed to others, his battles recontextualized as minor skirmishes against nameless brigands, and his very lineage, his connection to Marika, was denied or obscured. Any mention of him became a forbidden word, punishable by severe reprisal. Yet despite these concerted efforts to obliterate his memory, Messmer's legend persisted, thriving in the fertile ground of defiance and whispered hope. Among those who opposed the Erdtree, his name became a symbol of courage, a testament to the possibility of resistance against overwhelming odds. Bards, operating in secret, wove new tales of his exploits, subtly embedding his story within ancient myths and legends, ensuring that his spirit lived on in the collective consciousness of the oppressed. These stories, passed down through generations, often embellished and exaggerated, transformed Messmer from a mere general into a mythical figure, a harbinger of change, a champion for the dispossessed. His legend became a powerful counter-narrative to the Erdtree's carefully constructed history, a testament to the enduring power of human memory and the indomitable spirit of rebellion. The more the Erdtree tried to erase him, the more potent his legend became, a ghostly presence haunting the very foundations of its dominion. Crucially, the Serpent's essence, though no longer actively manifesting, remained dormant within Messmer. His defeat had not severed the deep, symbiotic bond they shared. Rather, it had merely forced the Serpent into a state of quiescence, a deep slumber within Messmer's very being. This was not a complete victory for the Erdtree, for the Serpent was not truly vanquished. It was merely biding its time, a coiled threat awaiting a future opportunity to rise again, to reassert its influence and unleash its primordial power upon the lands between. This dormant state meant that Messmer himself, though defeated and perhaps imprisoned or exiled, remained a potential vessel, a ticking time bomb infused with ancient, chaotic energy. The Serpent's lingering presence within him was a testament to its cunning and its profound understanding of the cyclical nature of power and rebellion. It understood that even in defeat, seeds of future conflict are sown, and it was prepared to wait for the opportune moment for the next great upheaval to awaken and once again unleash its destructive potential. This hidden truth, unknown to the vast majority of the Golden Order, represented a fundamental weakness in their perceived victory, a latent threat that would inevitably resurface to challenge their carefully constructed order. The Serpent's patience was legendary, and its dormant state was merely a strategic retreat, a temporary pause before its next, inevitable resurgence. Messmer's rebellion, despite its ultimate failure, marked a profound turning point in the Erdtree's seemingly unshakable dominance. It was not merely a military defeat for the Golden Order, but a psychological blow that reverberated through the very foundations of its power. For the first time in centuries, the absolute authority of the Erdtree had been directly and forcefully challenged by a figure of immense power and influence, one who was, in a twisted way, a product of its own lineage. This unprecedented defiance sowed deep seeds of doubt among its most loyal followers, forcing them to question the very nature of the Golden Order's divine right and its supposed invincibility. If even a demigod, a child of Marika herself, could turn against the Erdtree, what did that say about its inherent justice and its ultimate destiny? The unwavering faith that had once bound the populace to the Golden Order began to fray, replaced by a nascent skepticism and a growing sense of unease. The rebellion exposed cracks in the Erdtree's seemingly impenetrable facade, revealing vulnerabilities that had previously been unthinkable. This erosion of faith, though subtle at first, would prove to be far more dangerous than any direct military threat, for it undermined the very ideological bedrock upon which the Erdtree's power was built. The rebellion, therefore, was not just an event. It was a catalyst for a slow, insidious decline in the Erdtree's moral and spiritual authority, paving the way for future challenges and the eventual shattering of the Elden Ring itself. The Shadowlands, once a clandestine refuge for Messmer and his followers, a place where they could plot and gather strength away from the Erdtree's watchful eye, became a cursed and desolate region in the aftermath of his defeat. The immense magical energies unleashed during the climactic battles, coupled with the lingering, corrupting influence of the Serpent within, transformed the very landscape. The lush forests withered, the rivers ran black with pollution, and the once vibrant flora and fauna mutated into grotesque, twisted forms. The air itself became heavy with a palpable sense of dread and despair, a constant reminder of the devastating conflict that had unfolded there. This transformation was not merely environmental, it was a spiritual scarring, a testament to the raw power and destructive potential of Messmer's rebellion. The remnants of his power, like a lingering sickness, haunted the region, manifesting in strange phenomena, spectral echoes of fallen warriors, unsettling whispers carried on the wind, and pockets of volatile, uncontrolled magic that warped reality. The Shadowlands became a forbidden zone, shunned by all but the most desperate or the most foolhardy. The Golden Order, unable or unwilling to cleanse the pervasive corruption, declared it a blighted land, a monument to the dangers of defying the Erdtree. It served as a grim warning, a physical manifestation of the consequences of rebellion, a place where the very land itself bore the scars of defiance and the lingering shadow of Messmer's ambition. Its desolation was a stark reminder of the immense cost of challenging the established order. Finally, the Serpent within, once a hidden influence, became a whispered cautionary tale, a terrifying bogeyman invoked by the Erdtree's loyalists to maintain order and obedience. Its story, often distorted and exaggerated, was used to instill fear in the populace, emphasizing its insidious nature, its corrupting power, and its capacity to lead even the most powerful astray. It was portrayed as the ultimate evil, the force responsible for Messmer's fall from grace, and the subsequent chaos that had gripped the lands between. For the Erdtree's fervent adherents, the serpent represented the antithesis of the Golden Order, a primordial force of disruption and destruction that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their carefully constructed reality. They feared its potential to disrupt their established order, to sow discord and rebellion where there was once unwavering loyalty. The cautionary tales served a dual purpose: to demonize any form of dissent, linking it directly to the serpent's malevolent influence, and to reinforce the idea that the Erdtree alone possessed the power and the wisdom to protect the lands between from such ancient, chaotic threats. The serpent, though unseen, became a powerful tool of control, a symbol of the ultimate consequence of straying from the path of the Golden Order. Its legend, though born of fear, inadvertently ensured that its memory, and thus its potential, would never truly fade from the collective consciousness of the lands between. And so, as the age of the Erdtree continued, Messmer's rebellion, though quelled, left an indelible mark, a festering wound beneath the veneer of the Golden Order's dominion. The seeds of discord had been sown, and the stage was set for a cataclysm that would forever alter the fate of the lands between. We now arrive at perhaps the most pivotal era in our timeline, a period of unparalleled upheaval and profound transformation. The Shattering Era, the true collapse of order itself. Our journey through this tumultuous period begins fittingly with the event that gives this era its name. The Elden Ring, the very embodiment of the Golden Order and the fundamental laws governing the lands between, was shattered, not merely broken, but rent asunder by an unknown, almost unfathomable force. This was no mere act of vandalism, but a cosmic rending, a fundamental unraveling that plunged the entire realm into an abyss of chaos. The Golden Order, for so long the bedrock of existence, destabilized almost instantaneously. Its laws, once immutable, became fractured, their influence waning, allowing for the rise of aberrant phenomena and the twisting of natural order. The very fabric of reality seemed to groan under the strain, and the pervasive golden light that had symbolized Marika's reign began to flicker, dimming in the face of this unprecedented catastrophe. The exact perpetrator of this shattering remains shrouded in mystery, a question that echoes through the ages, but its consequences were immediate and devastating, throwing the meticulously constructed cosmic balance into disarray. In the immediate aftermath of this cataclysmic event, Queen Marika the Eternal, the very deity who had established the Golden Order and ruled the lands between for untold millennia, vanished. Her disappearance was as sudden and inexplicable as the shattering itself. One moment, she was the divine sovereign. The next, she was simply gone, leaving behind a power vacuum of unimaginable proportions. Her absence now was not merely a political crisis, but a spiritual void. She had been the anchor of their faith, the source of their blessings, and her vanishing left the populace adrift, questioning the very foundations of their existence. There was no clear successor, no designated heir to step into her colossal shoes and mend the fractured realm. The demigods, her direct offspring, each possessed a shard of the Elden Ring, known as a Great Rune, but none held the authority or the universal acceptance to unite the disparate factions that would inevitably emerge. The stability that Marika had so painstakingly cultivated over eons evaporated, replaced by an unsettling silence from the divine throne. It was in this crucible of chaos and uncertainty that the demigods, Marika's children and stepchildren, truly emerged as key figures, each vying for power in the vacuum left by their mother's inexplicable disappearance. These were beings of immense power, each imbued with a fragment of the shattered Elden Ring, and each with their own ambitions, their own visions for the future of the lands between. Morgoth, the Omen King, sought to uphold the Golden Order, albeit in a twisted, desperate fashion. Radon, the star-scourged general, held back the very stars with his colossal strength. Millennia, the Blade of Miquella, was an unparalleled warrior, cursed with the scarlet rot. Rani, the lunar princess, pursued her own enigmatic destiny, seeking to cast off the Golden Order entirely. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, embraced forbidden power. And then there was Messmer. Messmer, who had been either dormant or deliberately hidden from public view since his rebellion against the Erdtree, now re-emerged with a renewed, chilling purpose. His return was not a triumphant announcement, but a slow, insidious re-entry into the political and spiritual landscape of the lands between. The years of his seclusion, whether self-imposed or enforced, had evidently been a period of profound transformation and deepened conviction. His purpose now was inextricably tied to an ancient and unsettling prophecy, one that spoke of a coming age, a new order, heralded by the serpent within. This prophecy, whispered in forgotten tongues and etched into crumbling tablets, had long been dismissed as heresy by the Golden Order. But to Messmer, it was the key to understanding the shattered world and forging a new path. His reemergence was not about reclaiming a lost throne, but about fulfilling a destiny intertwined with a power far older and more primal than the Erdtree itself. Indeed, the serpent within, an ancient and enigmatic force, began to exert its influence directly through Messmer. This was not a mere symbol or a philosophical concept, but a tangible, insidious power, a primordial entity that had long slithered beneath the surface of the lands between, patiently awaiting its moment. The serpent within represented a power antithetical to the Golden Order, a force of transformation, rebirth, and perhaps destruction that had been suppressed for millennia. Through Messmer, it found its voice, its agent, its prophet. The serpent's influence manifested not only in Messmer's pronouncements, but also in a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the very aura surrounding him, a sense of ancient, coiled power radiating from his presence. It was a symbiotic relationship, Messmer gaining immense power and guidance, and the serpent gaining a conduit to manifest its will upon the fractured world. With the serpent's blessings and newfound purpose, Messmer began to gather followers. He offered them not merely a place in a new order, but a promise of power and transcendence, a liberation from the decaying strictures of the Golden Order. He spoke of shedding the limitations of their current forms, of embracing a higher, more primal state of being, facilitated by the serpent's transformative influence. His words resonated with those disenfranchised by the shattering, those who felt abandoned by Marika, and those who sought an alternative to the endless conflict among the demigods. His appeal was potent, offering not just hope, but a tangible path to power in a world where power was everything. These were not merely soldiers, but acolytes, drawn by the promise of spiritual and physical elevation, eager to shed their mortal coils for something greater, something serpentine. To solidify his growing movement, Messmer established a base of operations in the shadowed ruins of the shaded castle. This was no arbitrary choice, but a deliberate statement. The shaded castle was a place steeped in forgotten rituals, a site of ancient, perhaps forbidden practices that predated the Golden Order. Its crumbling walls and overgrown courtyards whispered of a time when different gods held sway, when different forms of worship were practiced. It was a place of secrecy and dark history, perfectly suited for a movement that sought to overthrow the established order and embrace a primordial power. Within its decaying grandeur, Messmer conducted his rites, communed with the Serpent, and solidified his control over his burgeoning cult. The castle became a symbol of his defiance, a dark counterpoint to the radiant Erdtree. It was within the confines of the shaded castle and under the Serpent's influence that Messmer's followers, who came to be known as the Serpent Kin, began to undergo grotesque transformations. These were not metaphorical changes, but physical, visceral alterations. Their flesh warped and twisted, their skin became scaled, their limbs elongated, and their forms began to merge with serpentine traits. Some developed venomous fangs, others slithering tails, their eyes taking on the cold, unblinking gaze of reptiles. This was the promised transcendence, a terrifying metamorphosis that bound them irrevocably to Messmer and the Serpent. These transformations were a testament to the raw, transformative power of the Serpent within, and a chilling display of Messmer's growing dominion over both flesh and spirit. They were no longer merely human, but something more, something ancient, something monstrous, utterly devoted to their serpentine master. As Messmer's power grew, so too did the pervasive chaos gripping the lands between. The flame of frenzy, a chaotic and destructive force, began to spread its searing influence across the land. This was not a natural fire, but a primordial, maddening conflagration, driven by the belief that all life should be melted back into a single, undifferentiated whole, erasing all distinctions and suffering. It manifested as a searing yellow flame that consumed everything in its path, driving those it touched to madness and self-destruction. The flame of frenzy was an embodiment of primordial chaos, a force that sought to undo the very concept of individual existence. Its spread further destabilized the lands between, adding another layer of existential threat to the already fractured realm. It preyed on the despair and hopelessness of the populace, offering a twisted form of liberation through annihilation. Messmer, ever the opportunist, exploited this burgeoning chaos to his advantage. He skillfully sowed discord among the already warring demigods, exacerbating their rivalries and preventing any unified resistance from forming against his growing power. He would subtly manipulate information, spread rumors, and even orchestrate direct provocations, all designed to keep the demigods locked in their internecine conflicts. He understood that a fractured enemy was a weak enemy, and as long as Radon fought millennia and Morgoth clung to his decaying throne, Messmer was free to consolidate his own power and further the Serpent's agenda. His tactics were insidious, playing on the inherent pride and ambition of his half-siblings, ensuring that their collective might would never be turned against him. He became a master puppeteer, pulling strings from the shadows, ensuring the continued fragmentation of the lands between. And finally, Messmer turned his attention to the lingering vestiges of the old order. He relentlessly targeted the remaining loyalists of the Golden Order, those who clung desperately to the old ways, to the memory of Marika, and to the shattered ideals of the Erdtree. These were not merely soldiers, but priests, scholars, and devout followers who refused to abandon their faith, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of its collapse. Messmer saw them as obstacles, as remnants of a dying age that needed to be purged to make way for the new. His serpent kin, with their grotesque transformations and fanatical devotion, hunted down these loyalists with merciless efficiency, extinguishing the last embers of the Golden Order's influence. This was a systematic campaign of eradication designed to erase any memory of the former reign and pave the way for the Serpent's dominion, a chilling testament to Messmer's unwavering commitment to his new, terrifying purpose. As the Shattering Era continued its relentless march, Messmer's ambition, fueled by the Serpent within, expanded beyond mere territorial acquisition. His gaze, now sharpened by the Serpent's insidious influence, turned to the remnants of Godric the Grafted's forces. These were not merely scattered soldiers, they represented a twisted amalgamation of strength, a desperate collection of grafted limbs and stolen power. Messmer sought not their defeat, but their absorption. His serpent kin, with their fluid movements and unsettling whispers, began to infiltrate these desperate enclaves. They offered promises of true power, of a strength beyond the Golden Order's decaying ideals, subtly weaving the Serpent's doctrine into the minds of Godric's traumatized survivors. The goal was to integrate their unique, if grotesque, form of power into Messmer's growing army, to graft their stolen vigor onto his own burgeoning dominion. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about the very nature of power itself, a dark mirroring of Godric's own grotesque methods, but with a far more ancient and sinister purpose. It was during this period of consolidation that the serpent within began to reveal its deepest secrets to Messmer. No longer content with mere whispers of ambition, the ancient entity delved into the forgotten lore of the lands between, specifically the primordial rites of the ancient dragons. These were not the dragons of Farum Azula, whose power was still somewhat understood, but the truly ancient primal dragons, beings of immense power, whose very existence predated the Erdtree and even the Golden Order itself. The serpent, in its timeless malice, had retained fragments of their lost magic, their unique relationship with lightning and stone, and their methods of channeling raw, untamed power. Messmer, already predisposed to wielding flame, found a terrifying synergy in these revelations. The serpent taught him how to draw power, not just from the fire of the giants, but from the very essence of the earth, from the ancient ley lines that crisscrossed the lands between, and from the untamed storms that once raged across the primordial world. This knowledge was a key turning point, transforming Messmer from a powerful demigod into something far more dangerous, a conduit for forgotten, destructive forces. With these newfound forbidden insights, Messmer retreated to the depths of the shaded castle, a place already steeped in shadow and decay. Here, amidst the crumbling stone and poisonous mists, he began to perform dark rituals, invoking the serpent's power in earnest. These were not the grand public displays of other demigods, but clandestine ceremonies, fueled by sacrifice and ancient incantations. The shaded castle, with its isolation and its inherent connection to rot and decay, became his unholy crucible. Within its walls, Messmer experimented with the dragon rites, merging them with his own mastery of flame. He sought to create a new form of power, a serpent fire that could consume not just flesh, but the very essence of the Golden Order. The air around the shaded castle grew heavy with oppressive energy, and strange, serpentine shadows were seen slithering through the mists, manifestations of the serpent's growing influence. The castle, once a symbol of tragic devotion, became a monument to Messmer's dark descent, a place where the boundaries between flesh and spirit, fire and shadow, began to blur. As Messmer's influence deepened and his rituals intensified, the Erdtree's light, already weakened by the shattering, dimmed further. It was a subtle yet profound shift in the very fabric of the lands between. The golden glow that had once illuminated the entire realm, a symbol of Queen Marika's divine order, began to recede, replaced by long, encroaching shadows. These were not merely physical shadows, but a spiritual darkening, a pall cast over the land by Messmer's burgeoning power. The natural cycles of day and night seemed to falter in places, with perpetual twilight clinging to regions touched by Messmer's growing dominion. The Erdtree, once a beacon of hope and life, now appeared weary, its golden leaves losing their luster, its ancient roots seemingly struggling against an unseen corrosive force. This dimming was a direct consequence of Messmer's actions, a visual manifestation of the serpent within's insidious corruption spreading throughout the world, challenging the very foundation of the Golden Order's existence. Aware of Messmer's increasingly dangerous ambitions, Rani the Witch, ever watchful and strategic, began to covertly oppose his schemes. Rani, whose own path involved the rejection of the Golden Order and the establishment of a new cosmic destiny, recognized the existential threat Messmer posed. His ambition, fueled by a primordial entity, threatened to plunge the lands between into a different kind of darkness, one that might even preclude her own plans for a new age. She understood the true nature of the serpent within, an ancient foe that predated even the greater will's influence. Rani did not engage Messmer directly. Her methods were far more subtle. Through her network of loyal followers and her mastery of lunar magic, she began to gather intelligence on Messmer's movements, his rituals, and the nature of the serpent's power. She sought to understand his weaknesses, to identify potential points of intervention, and perhaps to subtly empower those who might stand against him. Her opposition was a silent war, fought in the shadows, with information and manipulation as her primary weapons, a dance of intrigue played out against the backdrop of a crumbling world. In a bold move that demonstrated the serpent within's strategic cunning, Messmer sent his serpent kin to infiltrate the volcano manor. This wasn't merely an act of aggression, it was a calculated maneuver to either forge an alliance with Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, or to sow discord and exploit the manor's unique position. Rykard, who had willingly surrendered himself to the god-devouring serpent, represented a parallel, albeit distinct, challenge to the Golden Order. Messmer and the serpent within saw an opportunity in Rykard's blasphemous power, a chance to either absorb it or to divert its destructive potential towards their own ends. The serpent kin, with their ability to blend in and their mastery of deception, were perfect agents for this task. They moved through the treacherous halls of the volcano manor, whispering promises of shared power, hinting at a grander, more ancient blasphemy than Rykard had yet conceived. Their objective was to understand the true extent of Rykard's power, to assess his loyalty to his own serpent, and to determine if he could be a pawn in Messmer's larger game, or a rival to be neutralized. This infiltration was a testament to the serpent within's long-term planning, a recognition that even blasphemous entities could be harnessed for its ultimate goal. Amidst the chaos and despair of the shattering, a flicker of ancient knowledge resurfaced, the prophecy of the serpent. This ancient text, long forgotten and dismissed as myth, began to circulate among the few remaining scholars and antiquarians who still clung to their studies amidst the crumbling world. The prophecy spoke of a time of ultimate darkness, a world consumed by flame and shadow, and the rise of a new order, ushered in by a figure intertwined with the primordial serpent. It described a power that would challenge the very foundations of the Erdtree, a fire that would cleanse the world not for rebirth, but for a new, terrifying dominion. The resurfacing of this prophecy was not accidental. It was subtly orchestrated by the serpent within itself, a psychological weapon designed to sow fear and prepare the minds of the lands between for Messmer's inevitable ascension. For those who understood its implications, the prophecy was a chilling confirmation of Messmer's true nature and the terrifying destiny he sought to impose. It lent an air of inevitability to his actions, suggesting that his rise was not merely ambition, but a predetermined cosmic event. Driven by the serpent's hunger for ultimate power, Messmer set his sights on the Forge of the Giants. This was no ordinary forge. It was the crucible where the fell god, an ancient deity of fire, had once been imprisoned. Its flames were primordial, capable of burning away not just flesh and metal, but the very essence of existence. Messmer sought to harness these flames, not to rekindle the Golden Order, but to utterly consume it, to forge a new world in the serpent's image. His assault on the forge was brutal and swift, overwhelming the few remaining fire giants who guarded its secrets. He saw the forge not just as a source of power, but as a symbolic conquest, a declaration that even the ancient gods of fire would bend to his will and that of the serpent within. The acquisition of the Forge of the Giants was a monumental step, granting Messmer access to a power that dwarfed even the might of the Erdtree, a destructive force capable of reshaping the very landscape of the lands between. With the forge under his control, Messmer began to corrupt the fire monks, those who had once devoted their lives to guarding the sacred flames of the fell god. These monks, steeped in the traditions of fire, were ripe for Messmer's insidious influence. He didn't seek to destroy their faith, but to twist it, to turn their devotion to the flame into a tool for the serpent. He promised them a truer, more ancient flame, a power that transcended the limitations of their traditional worship. Through manipulation and the subtle whispers of the serpent within, Messmer convinced many of them that their true purpose was to serve a greater fire, one that would cleanse the world of its impurities and usher in a new age. He showed them how to channel the chaotic energy of the forge, how to wield a fire that was not just destructive, but transformative, a fire that could reshape reality itself. The fire monks, once guardians of a sacred trust, became zealous agents of Messmer, their devotion twisted into a terrifying instrument of the serpent's will, their ancient chants now echoing with blasphemous devotion to a new, dark master. Emboldened by his growing power and the acquisition of the forge, Messmer launched a direct assault on Leyndell, the capital of the Golden Order. This was a direct challenge to the heart of Queen Marika's shattered dominion, a clear statement of his intent to utterly dismantle the old order. His forces, now augmented by the corrupted fire monks and the remnants of Godric's grafted soldiers, surged towards the gilded walls of the capital. The serpent-kin, with their unsettling agility and venomous attacks, led the vanguard, their movements a horrifying dance of destruction. However, Leyndell, despite the shattering, still possessed formidable defenses and a corps of loyal defenders. The remaining knights of the Golden Order, though diminished, fought with a desperate ferocity, their faith in Marika and the Erdtree unshaken. The clash was apocalyptic, a brutal struggle between ancient faith and primordial blasphemy. Though Messmer's forces inflicted heavy casualties and caused immense destruction, they were ultimately repelled. Lendel, though scarred, held, a testament to the enduring, if fading, power of the Golden Order. This setback, however, was not a defeat for Messmer. It was a reconnaissance, a test of Lendel's remaining strength, and a clear signal of the greater conflict to come. It was during this period of escalating conflict that the Tarnished, drawn back to the lands between by the fading grace of the Erdtree, began to encounter Messmer's serpent kin in their travels. These encounters were often violent, forcing the Tarnished to confront a new and terrifying enemy. The serpent kin were unlike any foe they had faced before. They were not merely beasts or corrupted humans, but beings infused with the primal essence of the serpent within, their movements fluid, their attacks imbued with a strange corrosive power. The Tarnished found them guarding strategic locations, patrolling ancient ruins, and even lurking in the shadows of seemingly peaceful areas. These encounters served as a grim introduction to the true nature of the threat Messmer represented, a power far older and more insidious than the squabbling demigods. For the Tarnished, these early encounters with the Serpentkin were a brutal awakening, a realization that their quest for the Elden Ring would involve confronting not just the shattered remnants of a divine order, but a primordial darkness that sought to consume everything. As the shattering era plunged the lands between into an abyss of war and despair, Messmer, consumed by the serpent, within his insidious whisperings, sought to accelerate the world's supposed rebirth through chaos. His twisted interpretation of the serpent's prophecy led him to believe that the rune of death, long sealed away and fragmented, was the ultimate key to unlocking this transformative cataclysm. He envisioned its power not merely as an instrument of destruction, but as a cleansing fire that would purge the old order and pave the way for the serpent's dominion. This wasn't a quest for personal power in the traditional sense, but a fanatical pursuit of what he perceived as divine mandate, a grim destiny ordained by the ancient, coiled entity that had taken root within his very being. The rune of death, he reasoned, held the fundamental power over life's cessation, and by wielding it, he could orchestrate the grand, final collapse that the serpent so craved. To clear the path for this apocalyptic vision, Messmer dispatched a shadowy network of assassins. These were not mere mercenaries, but highly trained operatives, often corrupted by the serpent's influence or swayed by Messmer's charismatic, albeit terrifying, conviction. Their targets were numerous and strategically chosen. Other demigods, whose very existence represented potential challenges to Messmer's burgeoning authority and the serpent's agenda, and any tarnished champions who showed even a glimmer of ambition to repair the Golden Order. Messmer understood the fragmented nature of the Lands Between's leadership and recognized that any unified resistance, whether from the scions of Marika or the returning Tarnished, posed a direct threat to his plans. He aimed to sow discord, eliminate key figures, and prevent any coalescing force that could stand against the serpent's coming. These assassinations were brutal, often executed with a chilling efficiency that left little trace, further deepening the paranoia and distrust that already permeated the war-torn lands. Each fallen demigod or champion was in Messmer's eyes a necessary sacrifice, a step closer to the inevitable glorious chaos. The serpent within, a malevolent entity of ancient, primordial power, continued to fuel Messmer's fanaticism with vivid, terrifying visions. These were not mere dreams, but immersive, almost tangible experiences that showed Messmer a world reborn from the ashes of the old. He saw landscapes twisted into grotesque beauty, life and death intermingling in a chaotic dance, and the serpent itself, vast and all encompassing, presiding over this new, untamed reality. These visions were meticulously crafted by the serpent, designed to exploit Messmer's inherent desire for purpose and his deeply rooted sense of divine calling. They painted a picture of ultimate liberation from the stifling constraints of the Golden Order, a return to a more primal, unfettered existence where the serpent's will was law. Each vision solidified Messmer's conviction, transforming his initial doubts into an unshakable belief in the serpent's prophecy, pushing him further down the path of destruction. He became less of a demigod and more of a prophet, an instrument of an ancient cosmic will. Messmer's increasingly overt and destructive rituals, aimed at channeling the serpent's power and accelerating the world's descent into chaos, did not go unnoticed. The two fingers, the primary conduits through which the greater will communicated with the lands between, perceived Messmer as a dire and unprecedented threat to their carefully laid plans. The greater will, through its two fingers, had always sought to maintain a semblance of order, even amidst the shattering. Messmer's actions, however, were anathema to this design. His embrace of the serpent, an entity antithetical to the Golden Order and the greater will's dominion, and his pursuit of the rune of death, threatened to unravel the very fabric of existence as they understood it. The two fingers, usually slow and deliberate in their pronouncements, began to issue urgent warnings, their silent communications rippling through their various agents and loyalists. They saw in Messmer not just a rogue demigod, but a harbinger of an even greater catastrophe, a force that could irrevocably shatter the delicate balance they strove to maintain. Their concern was palpable, their directives increasingly desperate, as they sought to mobilize forces against this new, terrifying adversary. As Messmer's influence grew and the serpent's power intensified, a new, unsettling phenomenon began to manifest across the lands between, the appearance of the baleful shadows. These enigmatic entities, cloaked in darkness and possessing an unnerving agility, were inextricably tied to the serpent. They were not mere creatures of the night, but extensions of the serpent's will, its shadowy agents sent forth to sow terror and chaos. Their origins were shrouded in mystery, rumored to be corrupted spirits or ancient constructs imbued with the serpent's essence. They moved with a predatory grace, their forms shifting and contorting, often appearing and disappearing without a trace. Their purpose was manifold: to scout, to eliminate perceived threats, and to further destabilize the already fractured lands between. Their presence was a chilling testament to the serpent's growing power and its ability to project its influence beyond Messmer himself. They were a physical manifestation of the encroaching darkness, a silent army paving the way for the serpent's full emergence. Their attacks were swift and brutal, leaving behind a trail of fear and despair, further weakening the resolve of those who still clung to the hope of a restored golden order. Driven by the serpent's ever-present whispers and his own escalating fanaticism, Messmer conceived of an audacious plan to corrupt the Erdtree. This colossal sacred tree, grown by Michaela, the unalloyed, was a haven for those forsaken by the Erdtree, a sanctuary of purity and healing. Messmer saw it not as a place of refuge, but as a prime target for the serpent's insidious influence. He envisioned transforming Miquella's haven into a nest for the serpent, a grotesque parody of its original purpose, where its primordial power could truly take root and spread throughout the lands between. The Haligtree's immense spiritual significance and its deep connection to the lifeblood of the land made it an ideal conduit for the serpent's corruption. If he could defile this symbol of purity, he believed, he could effectively break the spirit of resistance and truly usher in the serpent's new world order. The idea was not merely to destroy the Haligtree, but to pervert it, to twist its very essence into something monstrous and alien, a living monument to the serpent's triumph. However, Messmer's efforts to corrupt the Haligtree were met with fierce and unyielding resistance. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, the Empyrean warrior whose devotion to her twin brother was absolute, stood as the unbreachable guardian of the sacred tree. Despite her own struggles with the scarlet rot, a devastating affliction that slowly consumed her, Malenia defended the Haligtree with an unmatched ferocity. Her loyalty to Miquella and her unwavering commitment to the sanctuary he had created fueled her every strike. She was a whirlwind of steel and skill, her prosthetic arm and legs moving with a deadly grace that belied her debilitating condition. Messmer's forces, including his baleful shadows and corrupted followers, were met with the full, devastating force of her martial prowess. Malenia's defense was not merely a physical confrontation, it was a spiritual bulwark against the encroaching darkness. She understood the profound significance of the Haligtree and the existential threat Messmer and the Serpent posed to its very existence. Her battles against Messmer's legions were legendary, a testament to her indomitable will and her unwavering love for her brother. She repelled every attempt, leaving Messmer's ambitions for the Haligtree in tatters and forcing him to reconsider his direct assault on such a formidable opponent. As Messmer's grand schemes faced setbacks and his direct assaults were repelled, the Serpent's influence, which had previously seemed unstoppable, began to wane. This weakening was not due to any inherent flaw in the Serpent's power, but rather a direct consequence of the coalescing resistance against Messmer. The tarnished, those exiled from the lands between and guided by grace, along with other demigods who had initially been at odds with each other, slowly began to unite against the common, existential threat that Messmer and the Serpent represented. The two fingers' warnings, once dismissed as mere pronouncements, now resonated with a chilling accuracy. The sheer scale of Messmer's ambition and the terrifying implications of the Serpent's prophecy forced disparate factions to set aside their petty grievances and personal vendettas. The realization dawned upon them that Messmer's victory would mean the end of all they knew, a complete annihilation of the established order and the imposition of a chaotic, alien dominion. This newfound unity, however fragile, began to chip away at the Serpent's hold as its power thrived on discord and fragmentation. Each victory against Messmer's forces, each act of defiance, served to diminish the Serpent's insidious grip on the lands between. The tide, slowly but surely, was beginning to turn. The culmination of this unified resistance led to a final climactic confrontation with Messmer. The details of this epic battle are shrouded in the mists of legend, but it is clear that Messmer, despite his formidable power and the Serpent within's influence, was ultimately defeated.